Once upon a time. Welcome to Australian Book Lovers, your destination for imagination.
A big warm welcome to everyone and a huge thank you for joining us once again for the Australian Book Lovers podcast. Our mission, as always, is to bring fabulous Australian and Indigenous literature spanning a whole range of genres to book lovers all around the globe, as well as fantastic resources and information for passionate authors looking to pen their next bestseller. I am Darren Kazenko, dystopian science fiction and horror author, avid reader, and one of your co-hosts and co-founders of the Australian Book Lovers podcast, coming to you today from Ghana country.
And I'm Veronica Strachan, aka V.E. Patton, fantasy, memoir and picture book writer, reader, and your other co-founder and host, coming to you today from Wurundjeri Woiwurrung country for this episode 64. Which is pretty amazing.
I think so. Yep, 64. I'm not going to start the countdown clock yet to 100, but but every step to 100 is equally just as stupendously magical. So I'm very happy to be here at episode 64.
Yes. Of course, there's that fabulous song by the Beatles for When I'm 64. So,
yes, of course.
You know, I don't know that we can say, when I get older, losing my hair. I don't think I'm losing my hair just yet, and I'm not 64. I'm only 62. Actually, no, I'm not. I'm only 61. God, I push myself. No need to make it. Anyway, yes. Here we are, episode 64, ready to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is, funny enough, that's one of the rare songs that I remember having to sing in those dreaded moments in early high school.
Oh, really? When I'm 64 by the Beatles?
Yeah, music class, yeah.
Can you remember any of the lyrics?
Will you still need me? Will you still feed me? Is it?
Yes.
Although, being a horror person, it was like, will you still bleed me?
Oh. You used to sneak that in, did you?
Well, not quite. I'd get in trouble for that. But we used to have to sing that one and Penny Lane.
Yes.
So, and both songs absolutely proof, if you were standing near me, that I can't carry a tune with my voice to save anybody's life, let alone my own.
There you go.
But number 64, fantastic to be here with you and with all of our listeners. And of course, it wouldn't be an episode without a little bit of some insights into the number 64.
Indeed.
And there's actually... Well, I'll start with, the somewhat of a glimpse from the numerological perspective, and that is that the energy represented by the number 64 supposedly explores new ideas and new ways of doing things that can be implemented by others. So perhaps even leading the way, I guess you could say. It also tries this and that to see how much more existing procedures and machinery can accomplish when tweaked. So it doesn't mind playing around with established rules and whatever and instructions and seeing if it can tinker and make things a little bit better. So I love that aspect of the number 64. But doing my little bit of rabbit hole research, I actually stumbled onto some different sources of information. I found some really intriguing, reflections of the number 64. So here we go, a little bit, almost literary, perhaps a little bit spiritual, perhaps a bit religious, maybe. I'm not sure. I'll let everyone else decide. But according to Claude of St. Martin, this number, the number 64, represents the complement of the octagonal circle, where the powerful number, after having covered all the depths of area and of the existence of the beings, restore the unit in its simple number, there where it was divided, and the action where reigned the nothingness and the death. There, that cryptic to say the least. So I'm gonna.
That's a cheery thought.
Yeah, I'm not going to try and break that one open just yet. But continuing on cheery thought, the mathematician W.R. Ball reports the following legend. In a temple of Benares, there is a dome under which a plate of bronze marks the centre of the world. On this plate, there are 3 vertical stems of 1 cubit height. During the creation of the world, God placed on one of the stems 64 discs of gold of different sizes, the largest at the basis, the others going decreasing. In top, the smallest disc. This accumulation is the Tower of Brahma. Night and day, without stop, the priests relay to transfer the discs from a stem to another. Only one disc must be taken at once, and it is forbidden to place a disc on another of lower diameter. When the 64 discs will be transferred from the Tower of Brahm to another stem, the temple and the universe will crumble. This will be the end of the world. There we go.
Again, another really cheerful interpretation.
Boom, boom. Really strange symbolism and imagery
Yeah,
there.
in 64.
All
Well,
from the number 64.
perhaps I could give you the bingo term, which is in fact 64 red raw. So that's not particularly fabulous.
I was going to say, that sounds like the fingers of the priests that were helping to bring the universe to a crumble. Red Raw
I
64.
think it's time to leave 64 alone and go for some news.
I think, yes, we shall leave some existential 64ness behind. And here we go. Okay, so yeah, a little bit of a what do they call it, Debbie Downer on the number 64, but it's such a. I saw that and thought, wow, it's from a writer's perspective and from a reader's perspective, it's quite artistic description of the number 64, because now I've got symbolisms of universe collapsing and weird gold discs. But nonetheless, there was also a fantastic year, 1964, and in Australia was quite a few little landmark events took place. So I quickly wanted to share some of those just so that we can get a glimpse of life back in Australia in 1964. Mm-hmm. Did you know that in February the first double-decker carriages began their trial runs on the Sydney Rail Network?
There you go.
So, wow, that's pretty cool. Here's a little bit something interesting. The editors, this is in April of 1964, the editors of Sydney's satirical Oz magazine, and those editors were Richard Neville and Richard Walsh and Martin Sharp, they were charged with printing an obscene publication. Oh. So there we go. I don't know the contents of it, but I suspect it'd probably be pretty tame if we look now. Now, in April, Melbourne woman Judy Hanrahan became the very first female teller appointed by the Bank of New South Wales since World War II, which I found quite bemusing for a fact, really. That's I didn't realise that there was such a gatekeeping aspect to becoming a bank teller. But there we go. In June, Macquarie University is founded. And now you talked about the Beatles. So, of course, in 1964 was the Australian and New Zealand World Tour by the Beatles.
Yes.
In July, the very first edition of The Australian was published in Canberra, the newspaper. In December, Melbourne's La Trobe University was founded. And book-wise, Donald Holmes' The Lucky Country was published. And there was the launch of ATVO. And did you know that marked the birth of the, count 'em, 1, 2, 3, the third commercial television network, now known
hit the big time.
Now known as Channel 10, which is quite ironic because I don't think it'll be more than a year or so before we will start marking the dates that all these television stations end too, now that everything has moved to internet. But that's for a different conversation. Inventions in 1964, I'd like to finish with an invention that was proudly designed and done here in Australia, and that is latex gloves. The Ansell company developed the world's very first latex gloves, and I suspect that they played a big part in the last 2 years here in Australia and the whole world.
Yep.
So
Maybe we should invest it in them, bought some shares.
Oh, yes. Well, what we need to do is be at those government meetings before they make announcements. Or at least
not necessarily
follow their
so.
share buying. But that is 1964 at a glance, and I would love to hear what some of your news is today and some words you might have for us.
Okay, so let's start with some words while we're, being particularly Australian focused. And we were still on M. There's quite a few M's, but I thought I'd share a couple. Would you understand the inference behind magic pudding?
Vaguely.
Vaguely.
My guess is it stems from, is it Alice in Wonderland or?
No. In fact,
it was its own story, wasn't it?
A famous Australian children's book by Norman Lindsay called The Magic Pudding. It did come out in 1918, so I will forgive you for not really knowing that, although, I did have a copy of it. But the pudding in the magic pudding renews itself as soon as slices are cut out of it. So Blinky Bill, that sound familiar? So he was involved in the magic pudding. But of course, it's often found in political context, and the then Australian Treasurer Paul Keating in 1985 said that warned that throughout the tax debate that there was no magic pudding to provide tax cuts for us all. So basically, it's that that sort of endless packet of Tim Tams, as you sometimes see. That is the other quote. So a magic pudding. We all would like a magic pudding, I think, with various things. That would be fantastic.
Yeah, of course my mind strays to hallucinogenic puddings now.
That's not really where my mind went, but thanks, Darren.
Well, first I went to Alice in Wonderland, and then of course then I went to puddings, and of course 1 and 1 equals 2. So yeah, in my head anyway. As you can see, the maths doesn't add up.
Yeah, not quite. All right. The second word, and really this is, the ubiquitous Australian term mate. So, it's been around for a while, used in various ways in Australian English as it is in other Englishes. And, of course, basically for us refers to a close friend or acquaintance, but can be used ironically, but usually equality and goodwill. So there you go. So there's lots of discussions about mate. Now, do you know what I mean if I was to say that person is going to do a Melba?
Actually, no. I couldn't.
No.
Well,
there you go. So one of our most famous operatic sopranos, Dame Nellie Melba, who is in fact Helen Porter Mitchell, who she died in 1931, but her stage name was derived from her birthplace of Melbourne, which is why, of course, we loved her so much. Now, she announced her retirement in 1924, but then gave farewell performances at Covent Garden in 1926 and Sydney, Melbourne and Geelong in 1928, and then sang in England over the next 2 years. So from the 1940s, it was like, you're doing a Nellie Melba, which basically means you're coming back again and again and again. So you could say you've no intention of doing a Melba, which is like you retired, you're done, you're out of it. But yeah, if you're doing a Melba, really, the thing is you're doing more comebacks than Dame Nellie Melba is quite a usual saying in our house. But then my grandfather heard Dame Nellie Melba sing, so he thought she was fantastic.
Now, I'd have to check, but I'm off the top of my head, I suspect that on the Australian Book Lovers website there is I think it's an historical fiction, a book on Melba.
Ah, there you go. There you go. Well, we'll have to have a bit of a look at that. The other word that I think most people would know, and look, there's a couple of interpretations of it, but is of course another ubiquitous, the mozzie.
Ah, yes.
Yes. So mozzie can be spelled double Z-I-E, of course, or double S-I-E, whatever you like to say. And it is, in fact, an informal term for the mosquito, which is a bit of a whatever. But you can also put the moz on something, which is just a little bit different. So the moz is to exert a malign influence on a person or to jinx them. And that's abbreviated from the form mozel, which is derived from the Hebrew word mazal, meaning luck, and probably came into Australian English via German Yiddish speakers. So put the moz on is recorded from the 1920s. So it's quite different from the mozzie being the mosquito. So there you go. There's a couple of M's for you.
Interesting. So if I were to put the moz on somebody, am I a goodie or a baddie?
Well, I think you're a baddie because you're exerting a malign influence. So you would have a number of characters in your horror stories that were putting the moz on.
Yes, but for the right reasons, of course. So,
of course, to make it a good story. Indeed. And I must say, I have just finished talking about a good story that's a little bit dark. I have just finished reading Tasmanian Gothic by Michaela Kopievsky. Wow, that is a brilliant story. Particularly dark and quite violent, and there's some people, poor old, the protagonist in that had the moz put on her, but anyway, I won't spoil it, but it is a really good book if people there, and that is of course on the Australian Book Lovers website, so jump on there and read that. I highly recommend it, and I'll do a review of it in a later episode. We've got quite a lot of reviews happening though, so we might have to wait for that one.
Well, speaking of good books, I wanted to take this opportunity in the news to spotlight a couple of books. So a couple of new editions, but to begin with, perhaps a little bit of a spotlight on a book series called Black Birch. And we are so lucky because the wonderful author K.M. Allen has just released the third instalment in the Black Birch series. and that is called The Ritual.
Hot off the press it is.
It is indeed. So for listeners out there or book lovers that aren't familiar with the Black Birch series, I thought I'd give you a brief description of each of the books, and then I'm sure it'll whet your appetite, and no doubt you'll be clicking very quickly on the fantasy or young adult genre to have a look and delve a little bit more. So the first in the Black Birch series is called The Beginning, and it reads, "It's a place no one forgets, except for Josh Taylor. The fatal car crash took more than 17-year-old Josh's parents. It stole his memories and returned him to Black Birch, a tourist town steeped in a history of witchcraft. To restore his memories and find the true cause of his parents' death, Josh Taylor must learn what's real, what's a nightmare, and what secrets his hometown of Black Birch has buried in its woods." Now, book 2 in the Black Birch series is called The Dark Half, and it reads as follows. Now that the origins of his power have been revealed, Josh Taylor's search for answers continues with the arrival of Callie, a girl running from her own secrets. She shows Josh how to use his gift in ways he didn't know were possible, but as they push the limits of their abilities, they discover there are consequences to messing with magic. And that is book 2, called The Dark Half. And now, as you said, Veronica, hot off the press is book 3 in the Black Birch series, called The Ritual. After the devastating events at the Playhouse, Josh is once again grieving. Unwilling to put Sarah and Max in more danger, he vows to deepen his abilities alone and stop the mysterious threat Callie warns was coming. But his powers aren't as strong as they once were. Something is siphoning his magic, and he doesn't know where to turn. Can he have faith in Eve after a sudden reappearance? Or should he side with Sheriff Stevens, whose help comes with secrets the lawman isn't prepared to reveal? When Josh is faced with enemies, both old and new, he has a choice to make. Fight the one who threatens to take everything from him, or put his trust in an enemy who promises to cast a ritual that will give everything back. And that is The Ritual, book 3 of K.M. Allen's The Black Birch series.
Indeed it is, and I'm about 25% through The Ritual, so so far so good. It leaps into the action, so no spoilers, but fantastic.
Always good when something leaps into action.
Yes, indeed.
You can catch your breath when you finish the book. Yeah,
Yes.
Exactly. And the other book I'd like to spotlight is a brand new one called, now this is a really intriguing title. It is called Reign of the Mad, (E) God. So Reign of the Mad or Made God by Joshua Hall, and it's a book that's been illustrated by Andrew Gibbons. So an illustrative novel, and it reads as follows. After experiencing paradise, humanity must now endure perdition. Through a series of journal entries and illustrations by supposed prophets, we follow the settlement known as the Varangian Guard as they try to move through the New World. Though they are strong, militarized and skilled enclave, the New World is an unforgiving place. From the towering constructs that are inquisitors to the ever-hungering Rakshasas, the New World is never short of horrors to send after humanity. Our survivors will need to learn to trust those even outside their home, as the path to salvation cannot be walked with mere guns and bullets alone. Do not let your eyes deceive you in this new world. There is no magic here, only science. And that was Reign of the Mad / Made God by Joshua Hall and illustrated by Andrew Gibbons. That one can be found in our science fiction genre, and Joshua is someone who will be coming on the show in the next few episodes also, and look forward to finding out all about the origins of what appears to be a really fascinating title.
Yeah, indeed. Mad and Made. Yep, I like that. Very good. All right, let's jump into a little bit of news from the Australian Society of Authors. And this is an important one that hopefully most people have seen because it's about the National Cultural Policy Submissions. These are due by the 22nd of August, so we'll probably have this episode, or it'll be perhaps just a fraction too late for that. But please, if you haven't already, have a bit of a chance to have your say, because you're invited to take part in the consultation to inform the new national cultural policy by the Australian government. And the policy is going to be launched later this year and shaped around Creative Australia's policy, which was launched in 2013. So there's kind of pillars for the consultation is, number one, First Nations first. recognising and respecting the crucial place of these stories at the centre of our arts and culture. Number 2, a place for every story, reflecting the diversity of our stories and the contribution of all Australians as the creators of culture. Number 3, the centrality of the artist, supporting the artist as worker and celebrating their role as the creators of culture. Number 4, strong institutions, providing support across the spectrum of institutions which sustain our arts and culture. And number 5, reaching the audience, ensuring our stories reach the right people at home and abroad. So I have to say that Australian Book Lovers is doing their best to, contribute to those pillars. And this was, we're encouraged by the Minister, who is Tony Burke, at the moment to, deliver a better future for Australia's creative sector. So let's sort of jump in and get there. So it might be a little submission from the Australian Book Lovers there. You just never know. So that's one amount of news, one event. Another one that I'd like to put out to writers is the 2022 Tasmanian Writers and Illustrators Mentorship Program. Having just read Tasmanian Gothic, I have to think twice about going down there. Some of the dystopian futures that Michaela Kopievsky has suggested are a little scary. But anyway, thanks to the support of Arts Tasmania, Tas Writers are offering a new mentorship program exclusively for Tasmanian writers and illustrators to help develop their work to publishable standards, which is just absolutely fantastic. So there are going to be 20 Arts Tasmania mentorships consisting of 20 hours each of mentoring over a year. There are 18 tickets to the ASA run Pitch Perfect professional development program, which I was just reading the statistics on the last pitch event that they had, and it was just brilliant. So if you want to know more about that, go to the ASA website. There's a 1-year free membership to the ASA, which comes with lots of great perks. There's a free ticket to present their work at a literary speed dating event. There's access to a private Facebook group, and there's a $500 honorarium for each recipient. So there's an information session Monday the 22nd of August, but I'm sure there'll still be more information available if you get in touch with Tasmanian Writers, Tas Writers. Entries opened on the 10th of August, but they don't close till the 19th of September. So, and the winners are announced on the 2nd of November. So get on in there. You just need a 300-word statement and your completed manuscript or whatever it is that you're sending in. Jump on the website, have a look, and get yourself in there, because this is a really good thing.
Sounds like a lot's going on down there.
Yeah, which is just fantastic. So the mentorship program for Tassie writers and illustrators. And I think that is all the news that I had. I think I had one other thing. Expressions of interest for going on the Australian Society of Authors Board. Have a look on their website. And if you've got accounting or finance expertise and you want to join their board, have a look at the requirements there, and get yourself onto the board of a really great organisation.
Definitely. I was so tempted to make a joke then.
Was it going to be terrible? Was it going to?
No, it's like, if you don't have experience in those fields, don't forget our previous leader has indicated you can just simply make yourself experience in those fields.
Yeah, you're right. No. We should just leave that one alone. And we should now think about the fabulous interview that I had with Nikky Lee.
Yes, indeed. Yes.
This was so good. Look, I must admit that I was a bit fangirly, but it was brilliant to chat with her. So Nikky is, of course, an award-winning author. She grew up in Perth, Western Australia, on Whadjuk Noongar country, but she now actually lives in New Zealand with her husband. So I'll tell you a little bit more about her in the start of the interview. But award-winning, lots of great things, and she is in fact a fantasy, science fiction and horror author, so definitely one of our family, that you and I.
And I think a little bit of dystopian can be thrown in there as well.
Yes, indeed. So Dingo and Sister, her Aurealis award-winning novella is definitely dystopian. It's just brilliant, and that's written about kind of Central Australia, I think, across the desert there. Anyway, we go into it a little bit in the interview.
Such a cool cover, that one, Dingo Sister.
Yeah, with no more faffing on, let's go to our interview with Nikky Lee.
Oh, well done. Without the further ado, was scrapped on that. Yeah.
I thought I'd go to faffing.
You're doing better than I. No, I can't wait. So to everyone, here we go. Let's listen to Nikky Lee.
Welcome, book lovers, to another author interview. And this is one that I have been waiting for quite a while, since I read one of her short stories quite a while ago. I am chatting today with Nikky Lee. Hello, Nikky.
Hi, thank you for having me.
No worries at all. So, Nikky, I'm coming to our listeners today from my usual place of residence, which is Wurundjeri country in Victoria, Australia. Tell us where you grew up and where you are today.
So I grew up in Perth on Wajak Noongar country, and I was living there until about 6 years ago when I moved to Aotearoa, New Zealand. And so I'm now working in writing in Auckland, which is in the Maori is Tamaki Makaurau. And I believe I've got this right because the New Zealand doesn't have kind of the territories like Australia does. But so I did some research into this, and I believe I am on Ngata Whatua territory, because they're very much overlapping. There's lots of different local areas and that sort of thing. So that's where I think I am. And I am still, if anyone would like to correct me,
feel free to.
Trying to find out. And it's really hard to, like, looking at all the Wikipedia and Google Maps and trying to find where all the local things are. And it's definitely not as clear as I would like.
There you go. And very good to hear First Nations language. I mean, it's fantastic. I know lots of focus on it over here in Australia at the moment. And my little niece and nephew are about to move to Healesville, and their Lote language, so language other than English, that they're teaching at primary school is in fact Woiwurrung, which is just brilliant to hear that they're going to learn.
I wish I'd done that when I was a kid.
Yes, yeah, it would be really good. I can't wait till it's kind of generally out there and I can learn more than the 2 or 3 words which I know, which is Wamanyeka, welcome. I must say though, I've got a friend who is she Kiwi still? She's been over here for 35, 40 years possibly, but she still has family, and she still has the odd word that sounds a bit like Kiwi, but she has a much better pronunciation of the Maori language, and she can probably spit out those words that you were able to tell us about where you are, because it doesn't always look like what it sounds like.
No, we used to, so my husband, who's a Kiwi, so when we used to do road trips sort of through New Zealand, he would point at the road signs and ask me to attempt to pronounce them, and then he would laugh.
Well, you just need to ask him, what do we have for tea, Dale? Fish and chips, and just get him to say that.
No, my pronunciation is definitely a work in progress. Yeah. And I remember one of the first things I had to learn was one of the Maori songs when I moved over to the workplace that I was working at, actually kind of got together and said, hey, we want to teach you the song because it's part of the culture here.
Beautiful.
And that was really fun to learn. But I remember looking at the words going, this is not how I think they're pronounced. This is what they sound like. And so I'm slowly learning the quirks of it, and it's becoming more and more familiar. But yeah, it's definitely one of those things that at some point I'm going to have to go take a course on it to actually kind of ingrain it a bit better.
Yes. Yeah. And look, courses in languages and writing is, what it's all about. And one of the questions that I actually had, which is kind of a nice segue, so if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you now, neologisms, which is making up words, and one of my favorite things to do. And as a fantasy writer, because you are a fantasy, sci-fi and horror writer, how do you make up words? So we've got Liz, who is the protagonist of your most recent book, which is The Rakan's Familiar. And a Rakan, where do you come up with that? I mean, how do you find those words? Do they pop into your brain? Do you Google baby names? How does it happen?
It's one of those things that kind of is a process, but not a process, if that makes any sort of sense whatsoever. So a lot of the time when I'm trying to think up of a certain type of name is I'll be Googling like the baby name websites and that sort of thing. But because of the Rakans, I was kind of looking through sort of old dead languages in a way.
Right.
So I was looking through Old Norse, and the closest Old Norse language that's still alive today is in Iceland. And so I was a bit worried that, there might be some bit of like, if anyone from there might read it, they go, this is weird. Almost like my language, but not quite.
Not quite.
So I tried to kind of tweak it just enough so it's clearly not any sort of language that anyone's familiar with. But that one, so for that language and for the names there, I tried to get sort of taking like the Old Norse to English dictionaries and kind of Googling, or not Googling, but searching through them for kind of words and phrases, and then kind of mashing them together to see what would happen there, and see if I liked the sound of it.
Do you say them out loud, or do you look at them on the page and
I
think,
do.
yeah, that works?
Like I'll sit there and I'm like going, okay, does this make sense? And then like every now and then, like I'll go back to the beginning of the manuscript and realize I've been flipping around word, like not syllables, but like kind of the G and the R's different ways and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And and then I realized, I've been saying this in my head wrong the whole way. I'm just going to change it because it's stuck that way now. Yeah, it ends up kind of evolving over time as sort of as the story goes on, I guess.
When you say it out loud, then, because I was going to read the blurb, because I've started in the absolute middle of the interview rather than introducing you and starting from the beginning. But I thought, I really have to ask Nikky how you say that place where Liz is going to go to. But anyway, I'll say it later and you can just correct me and that'll be fine. What I should say to the readers is, of course, a little bit more about Nikky. And Nikky is, in fact, an award-winning author who lives in New Zealand with her husband, a dog, and a couch potato cat. I mean, how perfect is that?
Yeah, she's very, very much a couch potato cat. The dog is quite needy, and then the husband just likes to sort of sit there and poke fun at me. We all kind of get along.
Oh,
it's good fun.
Which is good. So now in Nikky's free time, she writes speculative fiction, often burning the candle at both ends to explore fantastic worlds, mine asteroids and meet wizards. I want to be in your life. She's had over 24 stories published in magazines, anthologies and on the radio, and her short fiction has been shortlisted 6 times in the Aurealis Awards with her novelette Dingo and Sister. If you haven't read it, people, get out there and read it. Winning the Best Young Adult Short Story and the Best Fantasy Novella categories in 2020. So does that mean really you won 2 Aurealis Awards? I think that we need to say that.
Yes.
And in 2021, she received a Ditmar Award for Best New Talent. Her debut novel, The Racket's Familiar, which came out this year, is the first of an epic fantasy trilogy about a girl bonded to a monster. More to explore about that later. That is a pretty significant bio, Nikky.
Yeah, like it kind of, I started off and I was like, I kind of just go, this is the stuff that I'm interested in. Hey, I love wizards and space opera, and basically anything that's got speculative in it is
yes,
I am. And then it kind of just evolved from there, and it was quite quick actually. I was really surprised. I wasn't expecting to get any sort of awards, let alone listed. And I actually found out I was in the middle of a pizza shop, and someone tagged me on Twitter, and they said, I think it might have been Belinda actually.
Oh, right, yes.
Oh my gosh, Nikky, have you seen the latest shortlistings? And I was sitting there in the pizza shop, my jaw just dropped, and I think the poor lady that was serving me thought something had happened. And was some sort of family emergency, because I was just staring at my phone going, what is just going on? So it was quite a funny story.
No, that is brilliant. That is brilliant. And yes, Belinda Grant, I think you might be, she's pretty fabulous, looking out for everybody. Nikky, when did you first admit that you were a writer?
It was pretty early on. I started when I was about 13, going on 14, and it began with actually a drawing of all things. So I never really considered myself a writer, good at English in any sort of way, really. And then I was drawing this picture during the summer holidays, and all of a sudden I had the story going in the back of my head, and I was like, oh, this is really good. I want to know what happens next. And I'd be telling my story. And then I would kind of get to this point where there was suddenly not enough space in my head to be able to then find out what happens next, because I'm holding all these strands of character backstory and side characters and everything setting. And all of a sudden I'm just going, I can't find out what happens because I've got so much in my head. So I ended up trying to think of a way to get it out. And so I could sort of progress the plot and the characters, and I ended up writing it down because it sort of seemed like the most logical thing. And from then on I was hooked, and I kind of became, I think I wrote this story in about 6 weeks, which is by far the fastest I've ever written anything. And I wish I could do that now, but I can't.
Yes.
And so I wrote this story, and from then I was just hooked. I ended up writing, I think, another manuscript when I was in high school, which will never see the light of day again. And then so much so that I actually ended up doing a degree in English. And this is little old me, who was very much a BC student in English, suddenly going, I'm going to do an English degree.
Okay.
And then, it kind of became a passion. And from then on, I just kind of kept doing it, kept practicing. And eventually, like, I do a job now in professional writing, and then I write creatively on the side. So it's kind of a funny journey. It was never something that I really set out to do from a very young age. I sort of didn't go, I'm going to be a writer when I grow up. It was kind of like, I really enjoy the storytelling, the world building, and the writing is the medium for me to explore that, I guess, and to be a creative outlet. So I guess I started thinking of myself in that way probably after uni, when I had gone, okay, well, actually, I've got a degree in this, I should probably put it to use. Then I went, okay, let's see where I can take it, and I ended up sort of falling into marketing and content writing. And then okay, I'm definitely a writer kind of now. And then it's kind of just evolved from there.
Yeah, and now an author, now an award-winning author. Tell me about Dingo and Sister, because I read the story and just absolutely loved it. So it was originally published in Andromeda Spaceways magazine and was edited and published along there. And then it went into the Aurealis, and, the rest, as they say, is history. So where was the inspiration for Dingo and Sister?
Funnily enough, it was for Australian speculative fiction Facebook group. We're running a story, like a prompt on, what was it? I can't remember. It was something to do with future Australia type thing. And like I had this like kind of idea had popped in my head. I'm like, it doesn't quite fit. And I think it won't fit the theme. It's going to be too long. And I ended up kind of going, you know what, I'm just going to write this because it's in my head now and it's stuck. And the main inspiration for it was kind of thinking about climate change, because that was part of the prompt that they were talking about, or like kind of imagining a post-apocalyptic future. So I thought, well, climate change will be probably the most likely of any post-apocalyptic future. Like, touch wood, it doesn't happen. And then I did a trip across the Nullarbor when I was, actually I've done a couple of trips across the Nullarbor now, but I did one on the Indian Pacific train from Perth to Adelaide. And the landscape of that was just, it sticks with me now because it was so incredibly vivid. It was just, you go to sleep one night and you're looking at just your regular kind of everyday scrub, as you would sort of think of it in Australia. And then you wake up the next morning and all of a sudden it's just flat as far as the eye can see, and just really red soil. And there'll be sort of like little tufts of grass and maybe the odd tree every now and then. But the landscape was just so unbelievably striking. And so when I was thinking about climate change, that journey on the Indian Pacific popped into my head. I'm like, hey, this is a really cool setting. Maybe I can do something with this. And so that's kind of where initially it started. And then it became a bit of a challenge to myself, because at that point I didn't believe I could write characters very well.
Okay.
Excellently. But I kind of went, I need to work on sort of like doing character arcs and character inner journeys and that sort of thing, and overcoming whatever they want to overcome. And so the story became a challenge to myself to say, hey, you're going to focus on character and try and tell a really sort of emotional arc to this story. And so that's kind of where it came from. And it was very much a pantsed story. I ended up like writing the first couple of lines going, okay, let's just see where it goes. And so there wasn't much planning involved apart from sort of just the setting and the knowing that I wanted to have this overarching emotional story that goes behind the plot.
And away you went. It is pretty evocative landscape, isn't it? I remember the first time I crossed the Nullarbor was Melbourne to Perth with a girlfriend. We were in second year nursing. She had a 3-cylinder charade with no air conditioning, and it was February. So it was pretty foolish, but we did it anyway, and got rocketed along by the huge trucks and stopped at every pub we could for a shandy to keep ourselves hydrated. So it is just so much, it's not nothing though. There is so much distance out there, and the horizon is just magic. And I'm not sure whether that helped me with the reading, but certainly reading about Annika and her journey through heat stroke, dehydration, snakebite, her journey fraught with danger was just fantastic. I could absolutely imagine it out there. So really good.
Thank you.
Any follow-up for Dingo and Sister? I think I might have asked you this before, but any follow-up for Dingo and Sister?
I have brainstormed titles.
Okay.
That's about as far as I have gotten. I would like to write something short again to go to just like follow up, and whether I could turn it into like a little mini short story series or novella series. Like the will is there. It's just have to wait for the idea to kind of not much come along and hit me in the face, but I might have to unearth it a little bit.
Yeah. And being, as you mentioned earlier, a bit more of a pantser originally, I think sometimes we've just got to let those things sit, and even if you try and force it, it doesn't always work. Still a pantser, a little bit more of a plotter, somewhere a plotster in the middle. Where are you now?
Yeah, I'm definitely heading towards the middle out of necessity more than like any desire to. I do really enjoy just sort of like seeing what happens on the page, be like, oh, let's just follow that thread. That's really interesting. That's the most interesting part. We'll just go along with it. But now, because I'm writing a series with the Ralph mythology, is I need to pretend that like I knew what was happening all along.
Yes.
And sort of outline. And so I have outlined the second book and the third book. And so when I outlined the second book, I then wrote it and it was completely different. So at least there's there's an idea, and then I often will go, actually, I found a better idea that still worked with everything I've created already. So I actually kind of feel like it's almost part of the process. It's still semi-pants, or maybe sort of has what they say, like it's guidelines more than actual rules. But
yes.
Kind of the feel.
I am going to introduce the Rarkins Familiar, and let me just get my right page here. So this is where you can tell me if I'm saying the city incorrectly. The Rarkins Familiar is an upper YA, so that was an interesting one for you to share with us. And the brief description of this book is: an orphan plotting vengeance on her father's killers has all her plans go up in smoke when she accidentally forges a forbidden pact with a monster from the other world. Trapped with the monster at her side and slowly going mad from its magic, her only hope is to cross the empire to the city of Ilradis, where she might find a cure. Hot on her tail are the Empire's soldiers, bent on arresting her for the murder of one of their own, and a mysterious Mancer who will stop at nothing to capture the monster for himself. Now, Ilradis, is that the correct pronunciation of the city?
I in my head, I pronounce it Ilradis.
Ilradis, okay.
I am 100% happy for anyone to take their own interpretation of it. I feel like once it's in the hands of the reader, it's out of my hands, and they can pronounce anything however they like.
Anyway, they like, very
completely fine.
Okay, thank you, Roll. Moving on. So now I want to hear about the inspiration behind and the trilogy. Yeah, so what brought the Rarkins Familiar into your head?
Ooh, this is one of those stories that has been kicking around in my head for probably the better part of 15, 16 years. So I originally wrote the idea I can't even, like, you wouldn't even recognize it compared to what it is now. But I wrote this sort of very, very sort of kitschy sort of opening of the sort of this girl and this monster suddenly being forced together. So I really enjoyed that sort of forced proximity trope and sort of having to overcome differences to get along and sort of work together. So that was probably one of the tropes that I really enjoyed at the time when I started writing it. And then, and obviously, like, I love anything like animal creature companions. You probably noticed there's a theme there.
Yeah.
Right. So that's sort of like, of course, it's going to have to sort of find its way in there. And then sort of I was reading a lot of Robin Hobb and R.A. Salvatore when I was going through my teens and early 20s. And so that definitely rubbed off on me. I remember reading Robin Hobb's Realm of the Eldlings and just being absolutely blown away by her world building. And I just remember being so captivated that I missed the bus leaving New to go home. I missed the bus about 4 times.
Oh no!
One go. So I said, I'm going to be home at 2. I ended up being home at 4 because I was reading this book, and every single time I would look up and the bus would be pulling away. I'll just read another chapter. So it was just absolutely captivating in terms of just how vivid and how lush this world building was. So that was a massive inspiration in terms of just trying to bring a world to life and the people and the cultures and the magic and whatnot within it. I remember thinking, if I can do this even just half as well as she does, then I will consider that a success. So yeah, that was a massive influence. And then from the R.S. Salvatore side, like obviously it's very Dungeons and Dragons. I think it's Forgotten Realms is the world or the universe that it's set in. And I just remember being absolutely captivated by these fight scenes. Like, just you could not put it down while the fight scene was going on. Like, it'd be like, no, 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 don't interrupt me. I need to finish this fight scene because I need to know what happens. And so that was also a massive influence in terms of just wanting to have this really pacey, kind of fun, but also tense fight scenes that kind of pop up throughout the story. I was also wanting to do a lot of, so at the time, like this was when Lord of the Rings was really, really popular. The movies had just come out, and I was seeing a lot of rehashing of the same Lord of the Rings kind of races and characters, or character types, I should say. So I was seeing a lot of elves, a lot of Hobbit impersonations, orcs, and whatnot. And I was like, as much as I love it, I really want to do something different. And so I figured, oh, well, hey, like Tolkien created hobbits, why can't I create my own little, or several fantasy races, as it's turned out.
Yes.
So that's kind of where that went from. So yeah, there's like, I could go on for hours. Various inspirations and influences. So but yeah, like if you've got anything that you would like me to hone in on, by all means, point me in that direction and I can explain.
Yet I think that you've done it extremely well, and the fact that we are in fact the sum of all of our choices and our experiences. And I think that what you've explained is brilliant, in that it's a lot of things go into suddenly, not so suddenly, that idea that's been seeded in your mind for some time just decides that it's ready to go. Tell me a little bit about the grimdark fantasy. Is that I notice you're kind of merging into, or you're realising that you do write a little bit of horror, although this is, you've described it as being upper YA, so not the 13-year-old, but more, and somebody told me that YA is in fact 13 to 35. So I don't know that you'd call a 35-year-old a young adult, but I'll go with it. Who do you think that your audience is for the Rikens Familiar?
Well, I guess I wrote this story mostly for me.
Yeah.
It was, so I feel like it's people that have share some similar interests as me. So they like sort of a fairly pacey story. They like sort of to be whisked away in the second world of fantasy setting. But they also want to have a bit of, to kind of acknowledge the fact that, okay, some of these fantasy worlds are not so great to live in. And there is issues within those worlds that, and then obviously fantasy is a great way to reflect on issues in our society as well. And so a lot of that sort of the grimdark side of it kind of came out when I was reading a lot of this sort of very heroic, what they call noble bright fantasy, where it's kind of very much good and evil, black and white. And then as it was kind of almost kind of getting to the point when I was going through my 20s, is realizing, well, hey, not everything's black and white. There's a side to every story. There's like, some people can behave good one moment and sort of not so good the next, and then people change over time, obviously. And so I wanted to sort of show a world where everything is not squeaky clean. Not everyone comes out looking sort of this amazing hero that can do no wrong, and then the villain's not actually 100% like just evil for the sake of evil. So that was kind of the motivation behind that. And that was so I was reading through those years a manga called Berserk. And I have forgotten the name of the author, which is very bad of me. But he was one of the sort of, I guess I would say, founding fathers of grimdark, in at least sort of coming from the Asian side. And this story it's very dark and very, very violent. Highly recommend, but definitely over 18. And it struck me at the time as like, yes, this is kind of the grittiness that sort of was the reality of a medieval setting. Is it's not all nostalgia and like, oh, this is like amazing with chivalry and all that sort of thing. Like there's some of that, but then underneath all that, there's a really quite gritty, morally grey, questionable behaviour, all going on in there and kind of just bubbling up to the surface type thing. And I guess that's where the grimdark side of it comes in, because I wanted to sort of explore the issues of like, hey, when does power corrupt? And what do you do if you find yourself on the wrong side of the law or of authority? there's a lot of things in there. And then like obviously everyone has their own story and their own point of view, and then maybe in their minds they are the hero and not the villain. So I wanted to play around with that a bit.
It is done so particularly well, as you've got, murder, kidnapping, revenge and magic and all of those things. But what I like the most is the interdependence that Liz and Scar develop as they go along and slowly unpack for themselves and each other the things that, they begin to realise about themselves. So I always like a little bit more of the character, even though world and fantasy, sci-fi, whatever that might be, is important. For me, if the characters don't do some, be it growth or deterioration or whatever that might be, then it just struggles to hold me. Yeah,
I'm definitely the same way to a degree. Yeah, like as much as I love a good world building, it has the characters have to come alive in their own right.
It was something that I've just finished being a part of the first self-published science fiction competition that Hugh Howey put together, and so many books. Oh my goodness, so many books. The ones that really got me were where you could immediately engage with the character and either relate to them or not. It's, being a little older than perhaps, a young adult, still worthy of thinking about the relatability. Those are the ones that captured me, and then I could see where the story was going, as opposed to the ones that were brilliant or military sci-fi, even if they were great and they had, lots of good fight scenes or strategy or all those kind of things. If there wasn't somebody personally involved, I was like, oh, okay, skip on, skip a few, and it was a little bit harder to get there. So, yeah, interesting. Why horror, do you think? Why is that attractive to you as an author?
This is a funny one because for a long time I didn't think I was a reader of horror and B, a writer of it. And it wasn't until I was kind of poking around. I think it was actually when I was looking at the Midnight Echo annual publication from the Australian Horror, Australasian, I think now, Australasian Horror Writers Society, and looking at sort of what was the stories going on. I'm like, oh, these like I really like these. Like they kind of they go into dark places. And because I always kind of associated horror with this kind of like with Saw, so kind of the slasher side of it, and that's kind of was my sort of understanding of it until I started reading sort of the likes of Midnight Echo, and then going, oh, I write stuff like this too. Maybe I write horror too, and maybe I should read more of this. And so yeah, it kind of developed from there. And like I still feel like I'm very much sort of a baby in this sort of genre. Like I'm still finding new aspects to it that I was like, oh, I didn't realize that fell under that umbrella. Oh, I was like, oh, I really like the way they treated that, or that's really clever. So I'm definitely kind of still finding my feet in the genre. But yeah, I do. I think it's the darkness, but also it reflects a lot of sort of the human psyche in a way. Quite often, it sort of highlights sort of the not so much the failures, but like the potential for failure in a way. And just it's almost like kind of the old Star Wars, is there's a bit of the dark side in all of us. And I think I really enjoy how horror authors can highlight whatever element to kind of just go, hey, this is kind of creepy, but you also get it and you understand where that's coming from. So that's kind of where it deliberately makes you a bit uncomfortable, and I quite like that.
The deliberately uncomfortable, yes. Do you go and see horror movies? Is that something that you can watch with both hands in your lap, or do you put your fingers over your eyes and go, oh my God, here he comes again?
I can do some, but not all. Obviously I have a very vivid imagination. So I find I can read it and I have no problem there, generally speaking. But when I watch it, for whatever reason, it just sucks me in, and then I will be like, no, I need to pause it and just walk away for 5 minutes.
There you go. All right. Well, like, because Darren, as you may remember, he is an absolute horror fanatic and has watched The Shining about 64 times. I'll say that, and he'll say, no, only 65. Loves the horror movies, got all the oldies on VHS. So, yes, he is very partial to those things. Now, you also mentioned in the questions that you sent back some responses to us, the occasional thriller or whodunit mystery. So that's for reading only, or are you thinking of dabbling in that?
I guess like if I was going to dabble in it, it would always have to have a speculative element to kind of keep me interested in the long term. But I do quite enjoy reading, like even so one of the books that I find myself recommending all the time is A Secret History by Donna Tartt. So I kind of shove it in everyone's faces.
Right.
It is absolutely a phenomenal story. It's quite old now, and I've got like this battered dog-eared copy that I think I picked up from a secondhand bookshop, and it's done the rounds quite a few times now.
So it's A Secret History by Donna
Tartt, and I guess it's just because it's a bunch of uni students, so I instantly kind of go, yes, I get, this makes a lot of sense to me. So it's kind of relatable from that point of view, but it's a mystery about who killed a certain character, and it just absolutely, I wasn't sort of expecting to like it. It was one of those stories that someone else forced on me, and now I force it on other people. And so I kind of picked it up, went, oh yeah, that's right. I've heard, like, multiple people have recommended this to me. I'm going to give it a go. And then I think I blitzed it within sort of 24 to 48 hours. I just didn't put it down.
That is a joy, isn't it, if you can get a book like that?
Yeah, absolutely sucked in.
Tell me a little bit more. Let's go back to the Rankins familiar and characters. Who was your most or least favourite character to write?
Ooh. Funnily enough, Liz, the main character, was probably my least favourite in terms of just because obviously she's the main character. I ended up having to do lots and lots of work with her to kind of get her arc to where I wanted it to be. So initially she didn't have a huge character arc. A lot of the stuff that was happening to her and her growth was sort of due to outside factors. And so I realised, I need some sort of internal journey for her to go on. And so because of that, I ended up having to rewrite some of her sections a few times, having to like tweak and change and whatnot. And so in terms of that, I think she wasn't so much like my least favorite, but she was definitely not so much a chore, but a lot of work to kind of get to the point where I was like, okay, I can see you now as you are your own person in a way in my head. And she was also, her name kept changing.
Oh, no.
So I think I changed her name about 3 or 4 times because I was just like, no, it's just not sitting right. And then I deliberately changed her name when I knew I needed to change her character in some way. And so the name change was a way for me to go, okay, this is the new version of this person. And I wouldn't then sort of end up falling back onto the character that they were previously. So that was partly because of that. And then partly eventually landed on Liz, and I was like, yes, I like this. This works with this character. It's kind of short and snappy. And yeah, just kind of I kind of stumbled across it again on a baby names website. I really like this. It works with the story, with the setting, with the character. I can see this person in my head now.
When you set up your world and you have a strong female protagonist, how much do you think the world we live in now influences how you set up the politics and the gender balance and all of those kind of, or imbalance, all of those things that contribute to conflict, because we need conflict in our stories? So how much does all the things that have happened, really, I guess, in your lifetime, how much does it influence how you put a world together?
I guess from the gender side of things is like, obviously, like I grew up sort of in the 90s and 2000s. And so a lot of the fantasy that I was exposed to was obviously coming from like the 80s. The recurring theme of the damsel in distress just annoyed me to no end. I just got so frustrated with them. Like going, they're not all helpless. Like, no, we can have a sword, we can throw a kick or punch or whatever. And that really grated over a bit of time, and I was like, hang on, how come the boys get to have all the fun? And so I got to that point where I was like, no, I want to have this a setting where women potentially have the opportunity and the means to actually go, okay, yeah, I'm going to be a soldier, a swordsman or whatever. So in that sense, I wanted, it's almost like a wish fulfillment in a way. It's like, I want a society where potentially the genders are far more equal. And but there is still potential undercurrent of sort of which is where the grim dark side of things come, because there's obviously a lot more imbalance, and then you get like things like George R. R. Martin's horrific rape scenes and that sort of thing. And like I was like, I definitely don't want to go down that road, because that I was like going, I kind of read those stories in the news all the time. I was like, I don't want the world to go quite that dark. I still want to sort of have a little bit of hope in there, and a little bit of like, hey, we can actually, like, women and anyone that identifies as women can actually have a relatively equal footing. And I guess in a fantasy world is then you've got the likes of magic, which is a great equalizer, which definitely kind of can help, I guess, not especially address, but maybe even out the playing field, so to speak. Like, you don't necessarily have to have magic, but just the fact that it exists, I would say, in a society where it does exist, is suddenly a woman that might have magic versus someone that doesn't, is you go, okay, well, actually, that's going to be the equalizer rather than whatever gender they are, because the magic is going to be by far the more powerful thing. So that's kind of the attitude that I was looking at it through.
Yeah, that's good. Do you do backstory or write little notes and things for the politics or the social classes or those kind of things? Because you've got the manses and you've got the city, and then they're traveling in the country. You've got your different magical beings and their magic. Do you write down your rules? Do you have like a manual that nobody gets to see, of course?
I have a world building Bible, as I call it.
Very good.
And it's basically a spreadsheet of all the terminology that I've decided to sort of throw in there. And I do that mostly so I don't end up so I can at least remember how to spell whatever name I've created.
Yes.
Whatever thing. But in terms of character backstory, quite often what happens is I'll be writing it and I'll just slip something in and go, oh, that's juicy, maybe I'll do something with that later, and then probably forget about it. So I spend a lot of time going back and forth to make sure I haven't like accidentally written something that clashes.
I was going to say, especially book 2, because book 1's almost easy because you can throw in whatever you like, and then book 2 is, oh, hang on a minute, that's not how it worked in book 1.
There's been a lot of going back and checking book 1. Like, did I say that in book 1? I can't remember. There's been a lot of that. And what I've been doing is and it's things like the currency, for example, is I'll write that down because I'm like, no, because I can't change it now. It's been published. I can't just things like the gods, and in terms of like the Mansa ranks, a lot of that gets jotted down. So I at least go, okay, suddenly like the 3rd rank of Mansa is this, rather than saying, oh, actually, and then suddenly it becomes like the 2nd rank of somewhere else. And so, I use a lot of that. It's very, very quick note taking, saying like, this is the order and don't mess with the order. This is the currency I've come up with. Don't change it, Nikki. And so, there's a lot of that, but less. It's more like almost dot pointed rather than like detailed paragraphs.
Maps. I'm always interested in stories where the characters are going on a journey. Do people need maps so that you go, okay, they're in mountains, now they're in valley, now they're crossing a lake? Do you have in your mind the country? Do you think that map making is important in sort of journey stories?
I know that I like it in a journey story. I like it even in real life when I travel. I'm like, I need to, whatever it is, I need to know where I am geographically. Like, I don't know what it is. I don't know if other people have this thing as well, but I will find myself looking on a map or on Google, and then without knowing exactly where I am in relation to other things, I find like I feel really lost and sort of almost disjointed in a way from whatever's going on. So when I was writing The Darkness Familiar, I did have a map mostly in my head, and then I got to the point where I was like, okay, I need to actually draw the map and then go through and check that all the locations are actually correct, so that like, okay, the mountains are in the east in this section, that's still consistent with the map that I've drawn, that sort of thing. There is a bit of that. So yes, I'm one of those readers that really need a map to know where I am. Yeah,
that's good. It just grounds you in the correct space and time. It's very good. In all of those complex things that are in the story, is there, I guess, a message? What's the main message that you'd like readers to take away? Because as you mentioned, fantasy can be a really good vehicle for creating a point or discussing a concept in the real world. So is there a message in the story that you'd like your readers to really take away, besides absolute enjoyment and diving into the world? What's the message?
I think It's like don't judge a book by its cover, but with people. So don't judge someone before you've walked a mile in their shoes, so to speak. And I think that was something that I really wanted to sort of show in the relationship between Liz and Scar, and as that relationship develops over the story, is actually going, hey, once I understand you, your context, your backstory, is I understand who you are and why you're doing the things you're doing, and then that thing grows and you go, okay, like you're not behaving this way because you're being an asshole. You're behaving this way because of your personal history and the potential trauma that you might have had, or past experience that dictates that you need to do this in this situation because otherwise you're going to die. That sort of thing. And so is actually understanding, okay, from an understanding the other point of view, whether it's male, female, religion, like whatever country you're from, like anything to that effect, like that general feeling is like, okay, well, hang on, like maybe learn a bit about the person before judging, before kind of going, oh, you're just the bad guy, you're the monster, whatever.
Yeah.
That's the main thing that I wanted to try and explore and get across.
It may sound like quite a simple or straightforward message, but it's not, is it? Don't judge someone before you know more about them. It's so easy for us to try and put people in boxes or put books into genres, and as you say, this is fantasy, it's a little bit of dark fantasy, there's a whole lot of different stuff going on there as well. Can you tell me a little bit about your writing, your routine? Are you a morning writer, an evening writer?
I would love to be a morning writer, but
not so much.
No, it's one of those things where I get up and then I look at the laptop and then I just keep looking at it, and I'll end up getting distracted by social media. Twitter is very dangerous.
Oh yeah, we love Twitter.
And checking my emails and that sort of thing. So I actually find I'm better in the evenings, mainly because I can either sort of slip away to my study, or if I sort of feel like I'm like, oh, maybe I'm ignoring my husband a little bit too much, I'll just sit on the couch next to him and he can watch whatever he wants on the telly, and I'll just stick my headphones on and just tappity tap away.
Very good.
And I kind of find that just works for me, and I can write quite happily quite late into the evening because I'm definitely on the night owl side of things. And I also find that, like, because I like to be able to do some exercise or anything, I need to do it first thing in the morning, before my brain has kicked in and going, hang on, well, what are you doing?
Yes.
I need to get it over and done with before the caffeine is hit. I find that getting up in the morning, doing a bit of exercise, kind of clears the cobwebs. I'm ready to go for the day, and then I can come home at the end of the day and then kind of unwind with my story, basically.
Coffee in the morning, is that right? Was that the caffeine? So you're not
absolutely.
Yeah,
it's okay. Simple.
It is a magic bean. I did give it up a few years ago, but that's okay. I absolutely understand the need. Tell me a little bit more then about where you write. Do you have a space that you write in particularly? Like you've said, you can write next to your husband. I think that's amazing. I need absolutely no distractions. Otherwise, I really do procrastinate and look at anything else except what I'm doing.
So we've got this kind of running joke in our household that the seat and the couch has kind of got the imprint of my bum.
Okay. You're like, what is it, Sheldon on?
Kind of my spot.
Yes.
When I'm writing out sort of in the lounge, and like if my husband's watching rugby or something like that, I'm just like interested, and I will happily just sit there, stick some music on in the background, just to drown out the referee whistle. Yeah, no problem there. And then if I need to edit, because I'm usually just on a laptop, but if I need to edit, I really need two screens. Have like a bigger monitor, and then I'll move into my study and naturally kind of go, okay, I need to like sit down and force myself to do this, because I'm definitely really enjoy the drafting phase and the discovery of the story, and then the editing is definitely the chore.
Yes, I'm with you there. Hi, I'm with you there as I'm ploughing through my editing at the moment. So tell me a little bit about then your publishing experience. I guess they're, quite different. You've got a number of short stories or novellas, particularly, Dingo and Sister, that go in anthologies. So let's look at that first. The benefit to you of writing short stories or having your stories published in magazines or anthologies, what do you see as the benefits?
Like for me, like I never, until quite recently, like within the last 3 or 4 years, I never really considered myself a short story writer. Like my ideas always been way too big to fit into sort of 5,000 words. I was almost a bit like deer in the headlights, because I'd be like, oh my gosh, I have to write something that has to fit within 5,000 words, and the possibilities is anything. And then I discovered, again through the Aussie speculative fiction group, is when they were doing story prompt, I was like, oh, I think I've got an idea for this. And I kind of went, okay, yeah, I think I've got something here. And I'll wrote it down. I was like, sweet, it's in the word limit, which was step number one.
Yes.
From there, I kind of went, okay. And I workshopped it a little bit through various forums and my local writing group. And then I went, okay, what the hell, I'll submit it. And that got accepted. I was like, oh, okay, maybe I'll have a go with the second one.
Yep.
And so this was for the Zodiac series. So they were doing a story for they're doing an anthology for every single Zodiac. So I submitted for the first one, got in, and then I thought, oh, I wonder if I can do 2 for 2. Sure enough, I managed to write something super short. I think it was about 1,000 words. And I was like, oh, this is working well with a theme. Actually, it kind of narrows down the scope of what it could possibly be into something that's a little bit more manageable for my sort of approach, or the way my brain works when it's trying to think up with an idea. And then, so I kind of went, okay, well, let's just have a play around with sort of each of the Zodiacs and see if I can come up with something, sort of poking around on sort of Wikipedia and various other places, trying to sort of see if anything kind of sparks an idea or a sort of a seed or something that I'm like, oh, maybe I can explore that. It ended up being a way for me to play around with voice, point of view, tense, a whole range of things that I probably would never have done in any other format. I don't think I would ever go off, like kind of innately go, I'm going to go write a whole novel in first person present tense. And then I discovered actually I really, really like writing in first person present tense, but it would never have been something that I would have found had I not been writing short stories.
It's almost like a bit of a sandpit that you can try.
It is. It's very much sort of a, like, let's just have a play and sort of see what pops out, and see what kind of thing I managed to build. And and all of a sudden I found myself that I got to like the end of the Zodiac series and went, oh, I've had 12 of them now. Maybe I should start calling myself a short story writer.
Yes, that seems to be a bit of a theme.
And so it was kind of, as much as a surprise, I was as surprised as everyone, as anyone else, because I never really thought of myself as a short story author. And I always assumed that my ideas are too big. And like even now, I kind of go by the rule that, okay, what I think is going to be however long, just add 30%, because that's how long it will actually be. So if I think I'm going to be writing something with 6,000 words, chances are it's going to be closer to 9,000, and then I need to edit. But yeah, that's kind of how it went. And then, like kind of all of a sudden I was getting acceptances, and I wasn't really expecting it at all. Like I have a massive spreadsheet, and the ones that you see accepted is like there's probably about 10 for every one that has been accepted that has been rejected everywhere else.
Tell us a little bit about From the Wasteland.
Yeah, so that was it's been a really cool project actually. So it's the centennial of T.S. Eliot's From the Wasteland poem. And so we, as a group, commandeered by Claire Roden, who is the one that has wrangled us all together and had wrangled publishers and whatnot. So yeah, hats off to her. Like it was all her idea, and she basically just got in touch with me and said, hey, are you interested? And I was like, hey, this sounds like a pretty cool project. And so what we did is we've each taken a line from the poem and then used that as inspiration for a speculative fiction story, whether it's sci-fi, fantasy, horror, somewhere in between, magic realism. And yeah, so initially this is a classic Nikky move, is I wrote something that I thought was going to be about 10,000 words. It turned out to be 18,000 words. Okay. And way too long. I went, I need to change my line.
Yeah.
And so then Claire was very, very patient with me. And then I ended up writing another one that was very much shorter and well within the word limit, based on the line, the violet hour, or even the phrase. And so it's about chess and sort of chess games and bets and that sort of thing, with a speculative slant on it. I don't want to say anymore because I'll spoil it.
No, don't spoil it. And for anyone who doesn't know, The Waste is a really weird, I'm just going to say weird as in, truly weird as in not usual, poem by T.S. Eliot, which goes on for some time. Just read is all I can say. Go Google it and have a little read, and there would be some absolutely brilliant lines, and I can see
There are
that.
some absolute corkers, and I'm like,
Yes.
and it got to the point where like kind of I was like, oh, everyone's taking the ones that I liked, but then like there's so many that you really don't have to worry about it. It's like, oh no, okay, someone's taking that. Okay, I'll think of something else, and I like that line, and then but yeah, there's some really, really interesting lines, and the imagery that he uses. Like I'd actually, this is like a confession, I'd never actually read any of T.S. Eliot.
No,
I was very much
neither did I.
English, not a lit major.
Yeah.
And so yeah, the poem was quite new to me, but I remember I was reading it and I'm just like, okay, like there's so much you can take away from this, and so many it's like almost like in little sections where like you move from thing, and it's almost kind of like this weird dream in a way where like it's just it's really it's an interesting read, but like yes you have to read it slowly, kind of just
slowly, yes, and maybe in short stints, because I think that for the first read it doesn't always sound like it is the same thing. Yeah, anyway, enough about that. Let's go back to you and useful then short stories. You found you could put a story shorter. What writing advice have you been given that you found most useful?
The one from very, very early on was the avoid adverbs. That was given to me by a writing. No, he wasn't a tutor. He was running a course. John Harmon, I think his name is, and he's a thriller crime writer, and based in Perth. So that was kind of the first sort of, I guess, foray into sort of doing any sort of writing workshop class type thing. And so that was one of the things that I remember learning really, really early on from him. And that just revolutionized everything.
Okay.
Looking at the works, like coming back from the course and looking at what I'd written, going, oh my gosh, they're everywhere.
Like a mold, an infestation.
Yes. I was like, oh, we need some culling. And it definitely made me think about how the word choice I was using, how I was using language, and the whole show don't tell, which is I was like, then I went, oh, this is what they mean. Is that when I'm using an adverb, hey, potentially instead of using the adverbs of like sort of he said quietly is like, well, is there a better way to convey the said quietly? So you could say he whispered or whatnot. And like, is there a better verb to describe? So you learn a bit of like, there was a bit of word economy being taught in there. There was a bit of like really thinking about the image and the feel and the atmosphere that you're conveying. So that was definitely a game changer from when I was quite early on. And I think one of the other ones was learning about filter words. Kind of went, it just clicked all of a sudden. So it's the words like felt, look, saw, all that sort of stuff, where like he saw, he looked, he turned, whatever. All that sort of stuff is kind of a cross between sort of stage directions and reminding people whose point of view you're in, but you don't actually need it half the time. That was a really useful thing for me to learn when I was then editing the Raken's Familiar, because obviously I'd written this book over the sort of course of, say, probably like I finished it in 2018, but before that I hadn't touched it since about 2010, 2012. So there was quite a huge gap in me writing it, and I was going back through the earlier sections going, I know how I can tighten these, improve it, all that sort of thing. So it definitely made a huge difference.
What about advice that you would give? So you were given a great one about adverbs, and I'm sure you would pass that along, but is there anything else that you would say to aspiring authors?
I would say it's the whole like write for yourself and write the story that you want to tell, rather than the story that you think other people will like. So it's almost like write like no one's watching. It's more like dance like no one's watching. It's kind of like, don't let that internal editor go, no, this is shit or whatever. It's like, don't hold back just because you think someone else is going to read it and think it's silly. Is go, you know what, just like dive in head first and just go, just like absolutely embrace whatever weird wacky idea that you've got and run with it and sort of see where it takes you.
And don't necessarily try to write a particular genre. Just don't worry about the boxes that librarians make us put our stories in. Just get out there and write. I like it. Excellent advice. Who helped you when you were starting out? Because it sounds like there was a whole team. You've got the cat, the dog, and the hubby egging you on nowadays, but you've been writing for a long time. So who were your biggest helpers?
First one would be my grandmother. So she read almost everything I wrote.
Wow.
Between sort of the ages of 13 and till last year when she passed away. And so the only thing she didn't like was horror. So I made the mistake once of giving her a horror story, and she was like, I don't think I like this one.
Okay.
I was like, right, note to self, don't give the grandmother horror. She said no go. But she liked everything else. But yeah, so she was a massive supporter. And I think just having someone there that was like, oh, can you give me whatever you've written in the last week? She would always, so when I was in high school, she would pick us up once a week from school, and she would then ask for me to give her whatever I'd written that week. And having someone, it was almost holding me accountable.
Yeah, so good.
And just having that support from a really early age and actually going, okay, well, someone actually thinks that they're enjoying these ideas. And she would say to me, oh, I love this idea. You've got so much talent, blah, blah, blah. Like this is everything a teenage girl wants to hear, is in terms of at least from a writing point of view. Whether it was good or not, she would say, I love it, I want to read more. She would kind of, all through my through uni and anything like that. And then I ended up then sending her my whole short stories once I'd finished writing it and had it workshopped and was basically ready to go to submission. I'd just flick at her a copy and be like, hey, this is my latest one. And she would email back going, I love it, or what about this? And I'm like, well, no, I've already submitted it, so I can't do it. But yeah, so it's always just having kind of like your number one fan in your corner the whole time just made a huge difference, I think, in terms of just having enough confidence to then take the next step and actually put it out in the world and go, oh my gosh, please like it. Yeah, and even if you got a rejection, you go, well, okay, that's okay because someone is still in my corner. I think that was a massive thing for me. And then there's been a lot of people like through university. So I did an honours in creative writing, and the man that was running that was Van Eycken, and I actually wrote the first 2 or 3 chapters of The Rarkin's Familiar for one of the classes that he was, or the units that he was teaching. And he pulled me aside and said, look, I can't give you high distinction for this because it's not a complete story, because obviously they wanted a short story that had the full arc and blah, blah, blah. But I will give you the highest mark that I can give, which is for the criteria of the assignment, which was a distinction. And like that, at that point I went, oh, I think I've got something with legs. And so that was definitely a big confidence boost in going, hey, this is an idea that I should probably pursue. I think there was, I think I had an English teacher in high school who, until that point, I kind of was definitely very much would kind of flunk, or not flunk in exams, but I would definitely not do as well in exams. I don't write under pressure particularly well. I need to have time to think about it and mull it over. And so when we were given a take-home assignment and I decided to write a first-person essay and I handed it back, and he ended up printing it out to the whole class saying this was great. And I'd never sort of thought that I was in any way good at English. And so all of a sudden I went, hey, maybe I can do this. And it was just this massive wake-up call that, hey, I can actually have, like, because beforehand I'd always thought of English as kind of this boring essay, have to analyze everything, blah, blah, blah. Everything has to have meaning, blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden I was like, oh, hey, I can actually insert a bit of me into here. And that just completely like mind blown. And all of a sudden I was like, this is actually starting to get a bit fun. And like all of a sudden it was becoming more like kind of creative writing. And so, that was kind of, like those kind of key moments where like I could have gone another way, but because of certain individuals said 1 or 2 things, I went, hey, maybe I'm actually not half bad at this.
And you pursue that. That is really good to hear. Really good. Quick questions before we go. What are you reading at the moment? Because if you're like any other kind of fantasy sci-fi person, I'm sure you're reading a lot. Tell me what's on your bedside table or on your Kindle, or how many things do you read at once?
Oh, so many.
Yeah. I'm glad to hear that, because I've usually got about 5 going at once. People go, how do you do that? Oh, it's easy.
Easy. No worries. I think because at the moment I've decided I joined up with a bunch of summer reading challenges that
Mm-hmm.
are obviously in the Northern Hemisphere. And so one
Mm-hmm.
of them is an indie reading challenge that goes from June to September.
Very good.
So I joined that up. And so I've been reading a whole bunch of indie authors.
Mm-hmm.
And the one I've got at the moment is from a horror writer in New Zealand called Michael, I think his last name is Botour. He sent me an arc. And so I'm reading through that, and it's one of those ones that is like, I've already figured out what I'm going to say in the review, because I was like, yes, this is it. It is, so it's The Devil Took Her, Tales of Horror by Michael Botour. The way I would describe it is like skin crawlingly good.
Oh.
So the first story, I was sitting there going, I want to put this down and look away, but I can't.
Oh no.
And it's really good. I highly recommend that. And I've just finished The Kaiju Preservation Society by John Scalzi, which is a lot of fun. It's very, very light. And it's like kind of almost just the story you need if you're a little bit stressed or like it's getting you down.
Yep.
Is definitely go check this one out, because it's funny. It's almost like embracing your geek. It's in almost the Marvel sort of thing where it doesn't take itself too seriously. It points out all its fallacies. Yeah, it's a great read. It's highly recommend.
What is your advice for a reader? Why would a reader pick up The Rarkin's Familiar? Except that I'm going to say, get out there, people, and read The Rarkin's Familiar, but that's not from you. So why should our listeners read The Rarkin's Familiar?
I like to think of it as it's kind of a fantasy thriller with a little bit of horror in terms of like kind of the horror is more psychological. So yeah, I kind of think of it as like a fantasy thriller. So if you like really kind of fast-paced fantasy, a bit of sword fights, and then heaps of magic, like I'm always a magic lover. Like
bring it on.
creating magic systems, because I was silly and initially decided I was not going to have just one magic system. I was going to have two and possibly more, which I'm now regretting immensely. So if you love sort of more magic systems, kind of like in the sort of vein of Sanderson, then it's the book for you. And it's sort of multi-point of view, so you get to see the view of Liz, who is our female, and Scar, who is our monster, essentially. So yeah, if you enjoy sort of two kind of, I guess, cultures and people coming together and then suddenly kind of going, oh, and all the sort of the funny misunderstandings that happen in those moments where like the lost in translation in a way. There's definitely those.
Very good. Now, where can people find you on the web and social media?
So my website is Nikky with a double KY, thewriter.com. And you can also find me on Twitter and Instagram under Nikky M. Lee, so Lee. And my Facebook is also Nikky the Writer. And I'm just starting to venture onto TikTok, which I have.
I know. How many do we have to manage? So, I love Twitter, but that's about it.
Slowly understanding the world of TikTok and book talk and fancy talk and all the talks. And so I am very much sort of stumbling my way through that. So if anyone wants to sort of watch me stumble, by all means, come and have a bit of giggle with me.
Come and have a giggle, yeah. So when can we expect book 2 of the Rarkin's Familiar trilogy to be on our hot little hand or desk or Kindle?
I have to go by how long it took me to do the first one. Hopefully it's not going to be another 15 years.
I was just going to say, didn't you start 10 years ago? 15,
in terms of the publishing process. So it took about 6 to 8 months to go through our the publisher's process and the proofing and the whatnots. And so I'm waiting for them to give me the deadline for having, because I'm currently going through beta reading and editing it now. So I'm hoping to have that done by the end of the year. And then so with any luck, I would say middle to end of next year. Hoping, but yeah.
That's good.
And then hopefully the third one will be out within sort of 18 months after that, I would say.
Nice one. All right. Any final words for potential readers or writers or anything?
Leave me reviews. I would love reviews.
Yes.
And fan art. If anyone wants to draw me fan art, I would be forever in your debt.
There you go. Well, perhaps you need to be on, what is it, Tumblr? Tumblr do lots of
I need to go and investigate.
pictures,
But yeah, that would be like my number one thing as an author, is to get
Yes.
a fan art.
Get some fan art. Yeah, that is so good. That would, yes. Brilliant.
That would make my day.
Yep, make your day. Well, if anybody is a bit of a digital artist out there, please think about reading, or either Dingo and Sister or the Ruck and Somalia, and do some fan art for Nikki. That would be brilliant. We'd be really happy to share and promote your fan art on the Australian Book Lovers.
I will absolutely promote the hell out of it.
All right, very good. Nikky Lee, thank you so much from across the ditch, spending some time chatting with us about all of your wonderful work, and good luck with the next stories, and not only the Ruck and Familiar, but from the Wasteland Anthology and all the other stories that you've got in your head. Get them on paper and we'll be reading them as soon as we can.
Oh, thank you.
All right, take care.
Yeah, will do.
So thank you, Nikky Lee, for a fantastic chat. Really enjoyed hearing all about your creative works, about your awards, and how all of the things that are your experience you've put into your stories. And I particularly like your message about don't judge a book by its cover, or don't judge before you know someone's story. It kind of is a little bit of a theme also about the monsters within that we talked about in the last episode, when we were examining Lucy Christopher's book release.
That grey zone, and how far we can be pushed to go good or bad. Yeah,
indeed. And look, there's so much information about, if you go back to sort of one of the earliest monsters, Frankenstein and the Doctor, who was Frankenstein? He was in fact the Doctor, and the monster was not Frankenstein. And yet that kind of monster within us, there's lots of things that, while the monsters may be great analogies for life or getting messages across, there's a really strong school of thought out there that in fact everybody has a monster within them. So do you think there is a monster within all of us?
In a simple answer, yes.
Yeah.
In the sense of, are there elements that we would do ourselves proud not to let out? I think definitely, and I think, saying that, I don't think there's things that we create or harvest or grow ourselves. I think there's just elements to the human being that, if not kept in check, can rise to the surface and cause problems. I mean, if that wasn't the case, we wouldn't have monsters out there in the world, which is what we do have.
Yeah.
It's 2022, and we've still got absolute insanity and monsters running around, and they could be wearing suit and ties, they could be wearing military helmets, they could be drug dealers, they could be whichever sort of facet or whichever t-shirt you want the monster to wear. But they're still out there, so there's definitely, and likewise, there is stuff to feed upon. There's elements. Can a monster thrive if there isn't a hunger for something that the monster can deliver or offer sometimes too? Mm-hmm. So we might point our finger at the monster while relying on the monster for certain aspects. But
it's interesting. There was quite a nice little personal essay about the monsters within on a website called letterpile.com. And, this person was saying, using Stephen King's quote that monsters are real, ghosts are real too, they live inside us and sometimes they win. So the person was going on to say that, does it mean that each and every one of us is a monster? And they were saying not really. They believe the monsters are the kind that dwell in our hearts and our minds for a long time and wait for an outside force to waken us up. And then talks about things like, guilt and regret and shame and those kind of things. So true, but one thing that it kind of struck me when I was thinking about this is that there's a technique in coaching, which I've used from time to time, where people have had something that's kind of been the monster within for them, and there's a technique called externalizing, where you actually get them to have a conversation with that thing. So be it lack of confidence, or be it or not depression, because that really needs a little bit more work, but be it guilt or not belief in themselves or whatever that might be. So you get them to externalize that as themselves, as a person, and then you ask them to ask this thing questions. And it just struck me that that's kind of, bringing the monster within out, and it can be incredibly useful because it really articulates that monster and gives it that shape and boundaries so that people can then, not win, as Stephen King says, but in fact you can find that, that's a part of me. I recognise that's a part of me. I know when it's triggered, and I can choose, in many cases, many times, not to let that monster come out. Yeah.
It's interesting because, it may be a little bit of, wizardry, magic, or whatever word you want to use it, but perhaps using the word monster can kind of alienate or represent a division between who we are and the monster within us, as opposed to saying that the monster is part of us.
Yeah.
I like to think, thinking about the monster within, I think I like to think of it as there's an energy, there's a kinetic energy, there's an energy that has the potential, depending on the right circumstances or depending on the circumstances, will depend on how that energy, if it is released, how much of it's released, how powerful it is, and whether it does good or bad. But when we're talking about monster, I guess, that negative energy that needs to be harnessed on a day-to-day basis. And I think when we read good books where, the protagonist will break the rules or maybe does nasty things, or all those stories of revenge and those things that can bring us a little bit of satisfaction in the sense of, in a way that most of us won't be able to achieve because, of course, we wouldn't do things like a lot of the characters we read about in real life. I think that helps reinforce that we all have these different simmering energies inside of us. And I like to think of it, and I date myself a little bit here with multi-band graphic equalizer, because I know nowadays it's just an app setting, but you'd have your equalizer and you can adjust the music to however you like. And some people, by their nature, are going to have a little bit more, bass and less treble, and some more mid. And so everyone's got these equalizers, and especially the brain. So, you think about a 1,000,000 band graphic equalizer. So we all have our different settings, but it's easy to feel that someone is releasing a bit more of the monster if the EQ is just a little bit tweaked differently to ours, when really they're just allowing the energy to come out a bit more than what, say, we are, or that I am, or other people around us are. That's not to say that energy is not there. And of course, I think then part of that is when we see the graphic equalizer, if it gets broken and all the knobs go boom and don't work anymore, then we get some pretty nasty monsters. And that is when, call it primal urges, call it, that collective unconscious. Maybe there is a dark element to, dark side to that coin. But yeah, I think it's the monster is part of us for sure, but is the monster a collection of our desires or wants, or is it a collection of things that we'd like to do but no, we shouldn't do, or is it an energy that will come out given the right circumstances? And of course, we don't want to be in those circumstances a lot of the time to have that happen, because then it relinquishes any control we have, and it can result in some pretty bad outcomes. And therefore, that is true, that we do have a monster in us all. And I think literature and movies and music and art all help to satiate that monster, that energy.
Yeah, so perhaps there's an opportunity for us to look at the monsters externally and not worry so much about the ones within. Yeah, we've talked before about why we particularly love monsters, and because monsters frighten us. And there's another nice article that I read in Psychology Today, which suggests that whether they're monsters from nature or the monsters we created, that we must not look away, because the most effective way to deal with a monster is to confront it. None of that all horror stories or sci-fi would necessarily say that. However, interestingly, another root word contained within monster is the Latin monstra, meaning to show or demonstrate. So monsters are trying to show us something important. They're masks for what we really fear. So it's interesting. Does that mean because you read a lot of horror that you're a really monstrous person given the right circumstances?
No, not at all, I don't think.
I would say no. So I was going to say no, that is one. Now, the other thing,
I'm ruled by cats, so I'm hardly...
absolutely harmless. Absolutely harmless.
It's funny because, the question I sometimes like to ask is, when I'm thinking about, the monster within me, within us all, at the same time, would I like to be traversing this current reality on Earth without a monster inside me? Because I'd rather have the monster in me than not. Being that, I'd rather have the monster and not need it than need the monster and not have it. And it's funny because with the word monster, it has a sort of negative connotation, doesn't it? But it makes me think of all things, the late 70s series of The Incredible Hulk.
Okay.
Which was quite...
Interesting segue.
It is, because it was actually, I don't know when the last time you actually seen an episode, you can find one or two on YouTube.
Yeah.
There was actually quite a serious show, with real haunting theme, and it was actually quite a philosophical show. But I always remember the line, Mr. McGee, don't make me angry. You wouldn't like me when I'm angry. So does that make him, by default, a monster or a bad person, or this person saying, don't make me angry, because then this energy that's inside me that is very controlled now, and is and he's a very good person, but if you push him to the point where that energy has to come out, then potentially negative things or bad things, or at least destructive things, let's call it, can happen. So it's that potential, isn't it, within us, I think, is the unique aspect that is a monster.
Yeah, and there's a little passage that I want to read to you. This is from C. Joybell C., who calls herself proudly Wasian, which I had to look up, is in fact white Asian, and she lives in Manila. She is a VIP spiritual leader and has been named the Batman of our times. So she wrote some really interesting stuff. She calls herself a philosophical essayist, a cultural critic, a spearhead thinker, a science writer, a business investor, a counsellor, mentor, and author of over a dozen books. But this is what she said that I was really interested in. We don't fall in love with people because they're good people. We fall in love with people whose darkness we recognise. You can fall in love with a person for all the right reasons, but that kind of love can still fall apart. But when you fall in love with a person because your monsters have found a home in them, that's the kind of love that owns your skin and bones. Love, I'm convinced, is found in the darkness. It is the candle in the night. So what do you think about that?
Don't know. That one, it needs a little bit to unpack, I think. At first, listen, I'm not sure I can agree. I think, because then that would follow that the darker the element, the more intense the love can be.
Yeah,
and darker elements don't exactly make for happiness, unless love has no relationship with happiness.
So love is found in the darkness. Yeah, I'm not entirely convinced that
but it's a very intriguing,
It is intriguing. So basically what it has done is meant that I would like to go and read a little bit more about this woman. So yes, if anybody has read any of C. Joybell C's, by all means, send us a little note and tell us which of her books you think, or who wrote. And she gets quoted apparently fairly widely. So there you go.
I mean, I could understand if the darkness is, recognising in somebody else their acknowledgement of, all aspects of life, including all the negative, the bad luck, the heartbreak, the pain, and being, I guess if you see someone with just as much scratches and scars as yourself from getting through life, then yeah, that's a good thing, isn't it? Because there's a level of understanding, and there's a platform there that you can both share. So I guess I can understand that part.
And in some ways, it comes back to what the message in Nikky's book was, which is, don't judge a person, based on that kind of first impression, or, don't judge a book by its cover, which has been around. I had a bit of a look at that. It has been around, in fact, since the 1860s, that term that was in George Eliot's Mill on the Floss. There you go. So, yeah.
It's a crazy quote, isn't it? Or a little statement, don't judge a book by its cover, because...
Yes.
a book by general's design is to capture your eyes by the cover. So I get it on one hand, look, the cover may not represent how good the book is, which is a failure of the art department, realistically. Yeah. But we use it in a more broad term, really, in life, don't we? And so, the person smiling and giving you a hug may not have a halo. And that person that's angry and kicking the car door and super grumpy may not be the devil either. So
Yeah.
I just say all you have to do is spend 10 minutes looking at televangelists from the US, and you'll see that smiling does not necessarily not mean evil, because a smile can be completely terrifying.
Oh, yeah, you just got to think of Jack Nicholson's smile when he's being the bad guy. And
What about you, Veronica? Sorry, Veronica, have you got a monster inside you?
Oh, no, definitely not. I'm as sweet as pie. You know that, Darren.
You mean the kind of pie that keeps going every slice, it never runs out of slices?
No, I definitely have monsters inside. I've been around too long not to have them. But whether they rule me or I rule them, or we exist in this kind of uneasy alliance, I think is probably the way I would describe it most days. And some days they win, some days I win. Or some days I win, some days I win again, depending on who you are. So, yeah.
It's a tricky one, because I think, the society, there's so much of a power distribution within society, I think, but power can be gained by individuals who choose to unleash more of that monsterish power than others. So, for example, there's that cliche that, a good percentage of, say, CEOs and stuff would score high on psychopathic tests and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But do they just allow more of the monstrous energy out than others? A lot of us don't want to do something that hurts someone else's feelings. They don't want to do something that's going to cause heartache for a family. And yet you find people that will do it without a heartbeat and laugh about it and ruin a life, and then go enjoy an indulgent dinner to celebrate, whatever gains that has come from that.
Yeah.
That is letting energy out. And so it's interesting that, if we look at it in that way, theoretically, of course, I'm far from any accurate observations, but that's how I feel sometimes, that when you look at the power balance in the world, it really is distinguished by who is letting more of their monster out.
That is true. That is true. Yeah.
So does that mean if you or I wake up tomorrow and decide we want to let more of our monster out, that we will instantly gain more in life? I don't know, but I suspect that you would take more chances. You would care less about failure. You would care less about who's in your path, or what costs would come at your success.
Yeah, I could just see the swathe of destruction that follows you. So I don't think that would work.
I think it would, but I think you and I are similar in the sense of I wouldn't want to do that.
No.
But I think if I were to wake up tomorrow and let that monster out and really not, and when I say not care, that'd be one sort of feature of it, and not. And ignore any sort of impact I have on people's emotions or feelings. And then I suspect that within 6 months I could find myself in a pretty powerful position. Wouldn't be very liked. Would probably lost a lot of friends, but if I honestly let that energy run to the point where I would still be happy to look at myself in the mirror, I think each of us could find ourselves in far more powerful positions.
Yeah, and yet is that power really what you want? Is that something that you are seeking? This is just a philosophical, I'm not necessarily asking you to look at that. For me, it's not necessarily. I've done some things that I've enjoyed in my life, but at this time now, I'm really content with the mix of things that I do, which some people might go, oh, but you could have done this or you could have done that. Oh, I could have, but it's not what I am reaching for. What I'm reaching for is different, and maybe those monsters are, not the ones that are being fed at the moment. So it is,
Well, I feel like I have a zoo of monsters deep inside. Oh, yeah. And all different cages, all different pathways. No, I think, here we are on the Australian Book Lovers podcast. It's part of Australian Book Lovers website, and we talk all good things, books and writing, and of course you and I both love writing. And for me, both music and writing, and probably more so the writing, is I can let my little monsters out.
Yeah, indeed, and write some really dark stuff, because
absolutely.
Even thinking about Nikky Lee's Rackets Familiar, and as I've mentioned, Michaela's book Tasmanian Gothic, there's some really dark and challenging thinking in there that where Nikki's antagonist, Liz, who finds herself doing things that she couldn't necessarily imagine that she'd do. And this is where you talked about circumstances and that as triggers for letting those monsters out. And then again, finds in Scar, in the monster, some, and I'll just say humanity because that's easier, even though he's not human. But yeah, it's almost like humans are the monsters, and that's reflected in lots of ways in lots of literature. So lots of food for thought. But
And I mean, if you're going to write a really good baddie, how else can you do it without, at least to a certain degree as a writer, letting the little monster come out on the page? Because you have to put yourself in the position of being a monster, and when we say monster, metaphorically for someone, an antagonist in a story, or at least a very, very baddie. The beautiful thing is, of course, is at some point you're penned down and you can step away, and I prefer that. I'd prefer to be able to step away from a monster like that and have him all happy and curled up sleeping inside me because his energy's all out on the page.
Yep.
Then otherwise I see it expressed in our world today.
Yeah.
Yes, but thank you so much, Nikky Lee, for doing an amazing interview with Veronica, and of course for leading to these really cool and fun and sometimes serious discussions and all about monsters. And I suspect I've been called a monster a few times in my life, but probably due to, I know monster a few times for choices in movies when I've dragged people to the cinema.
Yeah.
You monster, how could you make me sit through that?
I know. When someone said, you've really got to go and see, what was the one with Uma Thurman and John Travolta?
Pulp Fiction.
Yes. And it was just like, okay, it was a particularly difficult time in our lives. I think we still had a couple of younger kids, and this was like our first night out in forever. And they said, go and see this movie, it's fantastic. Well, poor Monica, who told us to go and see it, that she loved it, I kept thinking, it'll make sense in a minute. It'll make sense in a minute. And it just didn't. So we, that was monstrous. That was absolutely monstrous. But anyway.
I wouldn't say it was monstrous, but along a similar line, we received tickets a few months ago now to a special performance as part of the Fringe at the Festival Theatre here in South Australia in Adelaide. Stunning theatre, absolutely stunning. And I was told it was called World of Music, and I thought, this is going to be amazing, because obviously we have WOMAD, we have the Guitar Festival and all that, so I thought this is going to be a whole exploration of all different musical instruments and styles, and I was so excited, and we got in there and we were sitting real high up, and it was all fantastic, and I was like, this is going to be amazing. And then I discovered it was called World of Musicals, and it was just a group of people singing songs from great musicals, and I'm sure, look, they had fantastic voices, and I'm sure, a live performance of those sorts of stage musical songs is going to make a lot of people very filled with joy. But as a heavy metal man, and I was expecting, like flamenco guitar and bongos, and I suddenly found myself trapped in that seat going, oh no. And it was a long show too.
Oh dear, that's very sad.
But I wouldn't have called that a monstrous thing.
No,
but,
not a monstrous.
If someone had done it to me intentionally, I would have called them a monster though, but it was a legit accident. So there we go. But I digress. So what have you got for quotes for today?
Yes, well, there are so many quotes about the monsters within, about not judging a book by its cover and all those kind of things. And look, I must admit, I did sneak in the one about Monsters Are Real from Stephen King. But this is one from Jaden Wilkes, who is a Canadian author of dark romance, urban fantasy and mind-twisting thrillers. I really like, she says, I write the ideas that keep me up at night. I thought, okay. So her quote is, some people wore their ugly deep inside where nobody could see it. These were the most dangerous monsters of all.
I think, that's interesting, that quote, because I think that is leading more towards creating your own monster, like the ugliness inside. That's something that represents you and what you've done or what you're hiding, and as opposed to the monster that's already in us, which is that energy, that primal urge that has to be maintained. That's really interesting.
Okay, give us your first one.
Well, I've got a couple of authors here, both horror authors.
Yep.
So the first one is none other, by none other. I'll say that again. The first one is a quote by none other than Mary Shelley. From Frankenstein. I really like this one. I have love in me the likes of which you can scarcely imagine, and rage the likes of which you would not believe. If I cannot satisfy one, I will indulge the other. And that, I think that's almost worth a tattoo, that. I think And, and I think that goes to a little bit about that whole sense of primal energy too. Because if you can't satisfy one, you indulge the other. And isn't it ironic, for me anyway, that's very similar to if you take away a person's reason to live, you give them a reason to die. There's that yin yang that if you allow balance or disallow balance, then you're going to have the extreme of one or the other. Yeah. Interesting. Mary Shelley, Frankenstein. There we are. What is your number 2?
Well, I had one that was a bit Frankenstein, but I did have a backup because I suspected that we might have a few Frankenstein ones. So I'm going to go with one by Chloe Thurlow, who is a British erotic writer, but she has some great quotes out there. And this is from her book, Katie in Love. There was a monster in me that had to be fed by success. There is a monster in us all that has to be fed by something.
Yes, I think I've heard that quote before. That's a good one.
Yeah. And look, I think it can be taken quite positively in that, ambition can be the monster and you can feed it. Success can be the monster and you feed it. Or creativity can be the monster that you feed. And I think for me, that's the monster that hasn't been fed properly or consistently. And so it's a bit lopsided, my creative monster. And as you said, now doing Australian Book Lovers and, writing books sort of separately and together and, being involved in the artistic community, the writing community, all those kind of things, is certainly feeding that monster and making it less of an overbearing nag that says, if you don't get yourself in front of the computer or do something creative, blah, blah, blah. And I think the monster has calmed, not found its kryptonite, but found the way to soothe it.
Found the good flavoured cookies.
Yeah, oh yeah, definitely good flavoured cookies. Yes, yeah.
Well,
second quote for you.
Yes, is from, I mentioned 2 horror authors. This one is a bit of a favourite of mine, Clive Barker, British author.
Right,
so, his quote is, I was a weird little kid. I was very irritable, bored and frustrated. I felt my imagination bubbling inside my head without having any way to express itself. Given a crayon and paper, I would not draw a train or a house. I would draw these monsters, beasts and demons. And Clive Barker, so I'm not sure if people aren't too familiar with Clive Barker. Obviously, he's written some fantastic novels, and a couple of those have been shifted into movies, or should I say, or turned into movies. But he's also a fantastic artist as well. So his sense of imagery is very dark, and it borders on the sort of the sexual dark nature. So for me, he's almost like a abstract sort of H.G. Geiger sort of thing. But it's interesting, I think, with Clive Barker, that quote, in the sense of our conversation about monsters, because one of his stories, or at least a movie that most people are familiar with, it's called Nightbreed, which is about monsters and the persecution of monsters, which, eventually it turns into the fact that, of course, humans are the real monsters.
Yes.
But then those monsters aren't exactly innocent either. So it's a very, it's an intriguing, strange, very fairy tale-esque movie. So, but yeah, that was by Clive Barker. So that is my 2 quotes for this episode number 64, which has been fascinating. I've loved being able to talk about monsters and, talking about the grey zone in between good and evil in the last episode as well. So it's been a really interesting couple of episodes. So
yes. It's very good. I am going to share just one more little thing that I wanted to talk about. Malapropisms, which of course is, no, in fact, a metaphor. So malapropisms is when you say something, a metaphor. But there was something from a writer on Twitter called Espezi32, and I says she loves the English language and the madness that you can do with it. Now, this is completely off the ball, but you can take one man's trash to another man's treasure, but you can't make it drink.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. We'll burn that bridge.
I call that Dadaism almost, isn't it?
Yeah, we'll burn that bridge when we get to it.
Oh, that's I like that. Yeah, that actually has sense in it and logic, and I'm subconsciously planned to do that many a time and succeeded quite a few.
Yeah, it's not rocket surgery. And,
there we go.
Yeah, not the sharpest egg in the attic.
Okay.
But this person's all-time favourite is Until the Cows Freeze Over.
Oh, dear.
But I quite like this one. You've opened this can of worms, now lie in it. So Yeah.
Oh, there we go. Yeah. Well, yeah, a bit of a play on...
Bit of a play on words. Language it's an enabler, it's a saviour, it's a terrible thing, it's a good thing. So, yeah, all those kind of things mean that you should read more Aussie books. And, of course, if you want to read more Aussie books and you don't know where to find them, you can find them on the Australian Book Lovers website, which is australianbooklovers.com. If you want to sign up for our newsletter, and we're getting lots of entries coming in for our giveaways at the moment, which is The Brink by Holden Sheppard and A Remarkable Woman by Jules Van Mill, getting some great answers to the questions that we've posed for people, then jump on in and you might be in the chance for a giveaway. If you want to follow us on the socials, we're on Twitter at Australian Books, and we are on Instagram and Facebook at Australian Book Lovers, although we're just messing about with Facebook trying to get that sorted again recently. So if it looks like we're not there, we are, but we'll be back. And if you're an Australian author and you would love to have your book featured as a spotlight or on the website or feature of the week, or as a number of people are doing, of course, jumping on having a chat with us, then you need to go to australianbooklovers.com/for-authors and load up your book for free or your short story, and you're more than welcome to drop a short story there that is free for readers and gives them an opportunity to have a little bit of a look at what your work is like, and then to jump onto your website or wherever contacts you've given us. Lots to do there. And of course, next episode we will be, or next podcast, next episode we are going to be chatting with the absolutely fabulous Holden Sheppard about not just his book The Brink, but about his book Invisible Boys, which was just absolutely amazing. And he has just recently released The Brink, and we got a chance to chat with him all the way from WA.
One.
Yeah, it is a good one. We had a lovely chat. It was really good.
And it's a good change of topic too. We used to get so many different topics and themes, and so many different books, so many different authors. It's just great, isn't it?
Yeah.
You never know.
There is something for literally everyone, I am sure, out there. And if not, if one of your favourite Australian authors does not have their book here, please let them know that they can have their book listed up here and we can have a chat, and you can even pose some questions, as one of our listeners wanted me to pose a question to Holden, which I did.
Oh, there we go. Excellent. Yeah. Yes.
How are we going to wind this up, Darren? Because I think your sign-offs are getting better and better, but you're setting yourself quite a high standard, so tricky.
I know it's a tricky one, but I do have an idea for this one. It just came to me.
Yeah.
Well, it's hardly rocket eggs, to use the style of play of words.
Yeah.
We are monsters.
Very,
very dark and scary monsters, and maybe giving our listeners one last chance to live. So we're going to let them escape from our demonic lair one more time.
Right.
I think we can do something with that. We can do that.
All right. Yeah, I'm sure you'll be able to find something that, spooks it up a bit. All right.
Yeah, so turn down the lights, blow out the candle.
If you want to remain in this mortal world, remember to read more Aussie books.
And that's our little monster trip for today. Yay!
Nice.
We'll see if we can make it work. Thank you everyone for joining us for episode 64, and thank you Nikky Lee for such a wonderful interview. Thank you for the food for thought, for the conversation, and to everybody, I really look forward to joining you again, episode number 65. Until then, take care.
Yes. And don't forget to hang in, because there will be a review and a reading from Nikky at the end of the episode.
Absolutely.
So, yep. Take care, everyone, and bye for now.
Hi, I'm Nikky Lee, author of The Rykens Familiar, and I'm here to read you a couple of chapters from the book. So let's get started. The Rykens Familiar, Part 1, Blood Pact. Where the skies where the Rakans hunt, bodies of bird and man akin. Woe the fool who meets their gaze and sees the ether's heart within. Fragment from the Epic of Asander, 500 years before the Iridian founding. Chapter 1. Hunger gnawed in Scar's belly. His feathers itched, bones ached. He crouched atop the shattered planks of Archer's wagon, a chipped and ragged rock in his talons, poised to strike the manacle around his wrist. Break this time. He swung the rock, smashing it into the metal. The rock shattered, crumbling in his hands, its grains bouncing down the mound of mud and splintered wood to the gully floor. Ether, damn you! Scar exploded, grabbing the chain and rattling it. The runes carved into the metal flared, strange letters flashing fluorescent green, and pulsed. Scar froze. Pressure slithered up his arm and he gritted his teeth. Cold seeped through feathers into skin, threatening to stab deeper, right down to bone. He stood, quivering, sucking in one slow breath, then another. The glow faded. Close call. His stomach growled again. Retha, curse this place. He kicked a half-buried axle, and when the wood didn't give, he swore as pain bloomed in his toes. The chain rattled under him, iron manacle chafing his wrist as he hopped about, wings flared, tails whipping the underbrush, hissing curses under his breath. No matter how he looked at it, the manacle was an ordinary piece of metal. He crouched over it again, wedging a talon into the lock, twisted, failed, and then tried to dislodge the pins for the 100th time that morning. The problem wasn't the metal. Metal he could handle, except for silver. It was the Galdar runes spelled on top of it. The glow in those cursed letters, scratched and scored into the iron, refused to die. Magic was annoyingly pointed in the hands of humans, when they could use it. As far as landslides went, this hadn't been a big one, but it had been big enough. The mound stretched from top to bottom of the narrow ravine. Archer's wagon lay overturned in the rubble, metal cage twisted, shattered wheels bared to the world like wooden ribs. Above, the cliffs loomed, threatening to dump another load of rubble on top of him. That he survived the first slide at all was a miracle. Locked inside the wretched wagon, he'd bounced within its tumbling mass all the way to the bottom, the final impact turning his mind black. He was sure it'd taken him at least a day just to summon the will to open his eyes again, skull throbbing as if someone had carved it open with a rusted knife. When he probed the raw lump on the back of his head, the world had swum and he'd doubled over and retched in the dirt. Now here I am. Scar shot the chain a savage look as it lay coiled in the mud, trapped and exposed in the middle of human territory, a hare out in the open. A breeze wafted the scent of musty earth over him, along with something else, a thick, sour stench he knew too well. Death. Someone, Scar hoped, was rotting somewhere in the mound. Probably the horse. With any luck, Archer too. And good riddance. If Scar never saw that accursed Mancer again, he'd die a happy Rakan. Which might not be far off if he couldn't get free. It was only a matter of time before the runes became too weak to bind him. Him and Galdar was like that. The magic was strong, but short-lived. If his captor was truly gone in the landslide, the rune's power would soon fade. But who knew how long that would take? A fine thing it would be to die of starvation or at the hands of some yokel one day, only for the sigilled manacle to break the next. He reached for the talisman about his neck and held it up to the light. Aloft in the air, the jagged rock of quartz spun in a slow circle. The lifeless rune carved into it, a memento from happier times, sent dapples of light over the forest floor and reflected a mud-crusted face back at him. Retha, you look like something a Jindir chewed on and spat out. Dirk clung to his wasted limbs like a crusted scab, getting under every feather, into every orifice. Scar scratched the mud-clogged crest atop his head. Grit rained down from the long plumage and stuck in the ridges of feathers along his nose and brow. He sneezed, teeth nearly taking off his tongue, and grimaced as a fresh throbbing started in his head, just under his horns. Wretched luck. He ran a talon over the rune in the crystal talisman, an old habit unbroken. Unlike the manacle, this piece of Galdar working had been made for his tampering, but he drained the rune's magic long ago. He gave it a shake. Useless thing. The crystal gleamed back at him, dead. A mirror was about all it was good for. He let it drop with a sigh. Forcing his eyes closed, Scar leaned on the mound, willing himself to rest, recuperate, then challenge the manacle again. A cloud fell across the sun. Eyes shut, all Scar knew was the warmth seeping into his bones left. He scowled, impatient as it waited for the warmth to return. It didn't. A faint, rustling footstep triggered a warning in his head. He vaulted to his feet. Too late. Not a cloud at all. A dart bit into his neck. His jaw dropped. A brief cry of surprise escaped him. His legs buckled. Humans was all he had time to think before the world teetered and turned black. Chapter 2. Gods and Dindohane, what have you done? Liz stared at the unconscious mass of feathers, blood humming in her ears, and tried not to vomit. An etheling, by Sep and all the gods, one of the otherworld's monsters. Here. This can't be happening. Not again. She groped for her sword, only to find the bag of medicines on her belt. When Hayne had run into the camp and pulled her from her room practice, she'd expected a hunting accident, a laceration from a wild boar, or her ankles sprained on the mountain trail. But this? The Eda Wildner boys beside her scuffed one boot, eyes darting to the small Galdar ward scratched in the earth before them. 5 runes marked the perimeter of the circle, lines and letters glowing green as its magic contained the creature within. Hayne shoved his hands in the pockets of his tunic. We shot it with a tinker's dart. With a tinker's dart. The words rolled over Liz. She drank them in, trying to drown out the thumping blood in her ears and the memories flooding in. She forced her mind away, swallowing hard. We? She asked faintly and searched the clearing. Trees, cliffs, a mound of rubble, and there, a tall, lanky shadow stepping out of the shade. Darren. A scowl crawled across her face. I should have cratting known. Hayne pulled her off the trail, his thin, girlish fingers pale around her wrist. Head shorter and 5 years younger than Darren, the 14-year-old looked more gangly than ever beside his brother. You shot it? Liz hissed at them. Are you mad? The brothers exchanged a glance. Both shared the famous white, almost translucent skin of the Eda Wildner clan, but where Hayne's eyes are bluer than the breast of a sky wren, Darren's were dark, unusually so for Wildner. Darren shrugged. Looked like it was in trouble. He stepped over the runes, shoving the creature's tail out of the way to reveal a heavy manacle clamped about its wrist. See? He said. A sigil. He turned it over to reveal the runes embedded in the metal. It's cutting him off from the ether. At this rate, it'll kill him. Him? Rage flared inside her. It's an etherling, Darren, she exploded, pointing at the creature. Sep Almighty is a cratting monster. She took in the humanoid body, the feathers, the claws. Under her tunic, the old scar twanged as if a pair of fingers had reached into her chest and plucked it like a string. Cold rushed down her limbs. Suddenly, she was standing on the road to Canis, soldiers on all sides, her father's screams beating in her ears as another monster sank its teeth into his. No, she bit her tongue, hard. Pain swept through her mouth, drowning out the memory. Save it for later, for when you find those bastards. She wiped clammy hands on her tunic instead, forcing them into fists so Darren and Hayne wouldn't see them shake. An etherling. She sucked in a breath, held it until her heart calmed. It was unconscious. For now. Sep helped them once it woke. Liz studied the creature again. It was at least 3 heads taller than any of the Wildner, and over 4 heads taller than her. Thin, too. The full set of ribs were visible beneath its mottled red plumage, and its limbs were knobbly and emaciated. Even the 2 black wings cocooned about it were dull and missing feathers. Under it, a long tail stretched, crooked feathers flaring from the end like the fletch of an old arrow. Liz frowned. This was not an etherling she recognised. It's a Rakan, Darren said. Rakan. She searched her memory for the name, and stopped, remembering the stories she'd heard. Songs of unwitting heroes dragged into the other world by these creatures, rumoured sightings of whole flocks winking in and out of the skies deep in the wilds. Curiosity flickered inside her, despite herself. Sep B, what's it doing here? I don't know, but it's not looking well. Darren nudged the sigil around the Rakan's wrist again, and this isn't helping. This took in the starved creature. Ether was them like water was to humans. They couldn't live without it. She blinked as the full implication hit her. Cratting shit, he can't be serious. You want to free it? She gulped. Her rage stirred again, hot and angry in her belly. For Sep's sake, Darren, just let it die. If it dies, what do you think will happen? Darren's voice remained steady, tone reasoning, as if explaining to a child. Liz ground her teeth. God, she hated it when he did that. Never mind that they were the same age. She pursed her lips. Truth was, she had no idea what might happen. Aethelings were Eager's wheelhouse, not hers. She hadn't got up to that bit in her mentor's lessons, nor did she plan to. Her grip tightened round her medicine bag. Not after what happened to Far. She knew all she needed to. Aethelings were dangerous. Darren scowled. Godspeed, Liz, haven't you heard the stories? When it dies, it'll tear a hole to the otherworld as it goes. So? He released an exasperated huff. So, it could pull everyone within a shout of here in with it. Of course, it might not have enough self-control left to not to, but do you want to bet on it while it's like that? He pointed at the Raken's ribs. A sinking sensation pulled inside Liz's stomach. She recalled the rush of Haynes' words back at camp. I need help, where's Eager? Their mentor had been off tending the herds. This was all there was. What about its Mansa? She asked. After all, where there was one Aetherling, there was a Mansa. There was never one without the other. She searched the clearing. Mansas summoned Aetherlings from the other world, bound them to their will, and by undoing their runes could return them there just as easily. Darren pointed to the pile of rubble. A lopsided carriage lay crumpled within it. They're dead. Probably. It'll be a while until we can clear it all, to be sure. If it's one of the Order, you're better off leaving them to die, Liz thought, but didn't say. She shuffled closer to the circle, marvelling at its stability. Haynes' power was truly something. Envy twisted inside her, not even a crease of concentration on his brow from holding the ward with his mind. He wasn't even panting as the magic burned through the ether's reserves in his body. It was then she noticed the odd shapes of the runes scored into the dirt. Invented runes. She swore under her breath. Gods and Jinder, Hayne. The Empire's laws of Gauda use were absolute. Their runes or nothing. No deviation. No foreign magic. She'd told him. Eager had told him so many times. Work unorthodox runes and you'll track the notice of the Order. She shuddered, her scar pulling up her throat as she felt down the images again. Nothing good ever came from that. Darren stooped and put a hand to the Raken's head, between the short roping horns poking through its crest, and rolled the creature's head to one side. A gash and a patch of half-dried blood the size of Liz's palm stained the Raken's feathers. Can you tend to this? He asked. Liz's gaze fell on the Raken's curled talons. Each one graced the end of a long digit, black as bear claws and covered in grit. They could wrap around her throat with length to spare. A gurgling scream rose out of her memory. She pushed it down. If Darren could walk around it like that, it must be safe. Well, safe as it could be. All right, she thumped her medicine bag down and shot Hayne a glare. We'll talk about this later. She indicated the runes. You're sure it's unconscious? The two boys nodded. She stepped over the circle, hoping neither Wilderness saw the tremble in her legs. Breathe, it's fine. Be careful of its blood. I hear it's potent, Darren advised. Nis knelt, examining the blow to the Raken's skull. It had been a hard one. It was a wonder the creature was still breathing despite its size. Thanks to its ether origins, no doubt. The beast reeked of the other world, even to her. She could practically taste the zing of it on her lips, hot like the Quoran spices Far used to covet. Her scar twisted across her chest again, and she clenched a fist. Stop it. Darren leaned over her shoulder. Have you seen a Raken before? When? He hesitated. When you travelled? Liz cracked open a pot of salve, rubbed a bandage into it, and dabbed at the wound. No, I've never seen one. At least not one that was alive. I saw bones in the markets once. She suppressed a shiver at the memory of a merchant handling a skull with teeth the size of her fingers. Her father had laughed and politely shaken his head at the offer. Too expensive, as always. Another twinge. Is it true that the Mansas hunt them? Haynes questioned to Darren, pulled her back. Darren shrugged. They're Aetherlings, so it makes sense, I suppose. Then why, by Decept's divine balls, did you shoot one with a tinker's blowpipe? Liz bit down on her fury. They were lucky the dart had worked at all. She dug another lump of salve out and pressed it to the Raken's feathers. I heard you can gain second sight if you eat their eyes, Hayne was saying. Supposedly their blood brings back the dead, if they're fresh. Liz scowled. No one comes back from the dead. She held her tongue and said, without looking up, You're better off putting your faith in something real than in silly superstitions. Hayne shrank back as if Liz had bitten him. Darren sighed. That's our Liz, ever the practical one. He turned for the ridge. I'm going to find Eager. I want that sigil off. Liz glowered as his figure loped off through the trees, then returned her salve to a bag and hunted for a needle and thread. Her gaze drifted back to the Raken, taking in the faded braids around its bony hips, the undergarment's drawcord tight with length to spare. She scowled. Clothes indicated some level of intelligence, which only made the Aetherling more dangerous. Thou shalt not summon above thy station. Callion's fourth law echoed in her head as in Eager's rasping tones. It took more than a standard foot soldier to keep and control a Raken. The more intelligent the Aetherling, the harder they were to control. Even Liz knew that. She frowned and glanced at the sigiled manacle again, then to the pile of rubble beyond. What kind of Mancer could control a Raken even after they were dead? Liz eyed the splintered skeleton of the cart poking out from the mud. No matter. Whomever the Mancer had been, he or she was gone, just as well. Most trained Mancers were affiliated with the Order, and the less of the Order in the north, the better. She found a needle and worked a thread into it. Next to the circle, Hayne traced runes in the dirt with a finger, waiting for Darren's return. He finished one, scrubbed it out, and began again with a new one. Lish squashed her jealousy. Unlike her, Hayne was gifted with the runes. He took to Gouda like a goat to grass. Sensing her watching, Hayne flashed a sheepish grin and rubbed out his latest bastardised rune. "Just experimenting," he said. Lish glared at him. "Try and explain that to an Order soldier. I promise it won't go down nearly as well. One look at those illegal runes and they'll brand you as a crat, and that will snuff your magic out for good." Hayne rolled his eyes. "The Order doesn't come..." He stopped, face falling, the pink in his cheeks leaching away. Liz heard it too, a hiss at her back, leaves crunching under a great weight. "Liz!" Hayne's voice pitched upwards. She spun and her gaze latched onto the Raken. Time slowed, blood drained from her limbs. It was awake. Oh gods and Jinder, how could it be awake? A feathered arm fell across her shoulders, dragged her back, long fingers wrapped under her chin, tight. Liz gasped and fought for air. Talons pricked her skin. A hot breath fell against her ear. "Unbind!" She froze. It could talk. Her mind wavered. By Sep, it could talk. A red eye glared at her, pupil round, the iris a fierce blood-red sunrise. "Unbind!" The word hissed out through a set of teeth in a too-wide mouth. Liz stared, mind blank, unable to think. The Raken shifted, revealing its left eye. Set in a pit of black, a brilliant iris sat within, rounded and silver as the moon in a night sky. A black prick of a pupil in its middle. The mismatched gaze bored into her, and Liz's insides shriveled. Oh gods, she was going to die, here, today, now. Another hot, sticky breath rolled across her face. "Liz!" Hayne charged in, swinging a heavy stick like a broadsword. "Get off, you bastard!" He lashed the branch at the Aetherling's head. Its talons released, air flooded Liz's lungs, and her knees hit the ground. "No, Hayne, you mustn't." The boy lunged in again, martial form, terrible. "Stay off," he yelled. The Raken hissed, lips peeling back, and intercepted. It pounced hard and fast, knocking Hayne to the ground. For a heartbeat, Hayne scrabbled, flailing, grappling, kicking. Then the Raken's fist cracked into his head. The boy crumpled, and his ward around them dimmed as his eyes unfocused and head lolled. Blood rushed to Liz's limbs. "Move!" she screamed at her legs. "Fight, or we both die here." The Raken rounded on her. Liz scrambled up, groping for the knife in her belt. She snapped the weapon up, pathetically small next to those talons. She swallowed. No disarming them either. The Raken sprang, claws scything down. Pain fired across her arm, and she beat back a cry. "Block it out, hold the knife, stay alive." She spun away, heart thudding. The Raken followed. She dodged another swing, swept in and slashed at the Raken's throat. She got its cheek instead, nicking a red scratch under one eye. The Aetherling hissed and grabbed for her, chain and manacle rattling around its wrist. Her eyes followed the links trailing through the dirt. That's it. Liz lunged, scooped up the chain and pulled. The Raken stumbled, thrown off balance, and rounded on her again. She sidestepped another strike and went sprawling backwards, over Hayne. Shit. She scrambled over hand and knee, struggling to find her feet. The Raken came like a charging bull. It dove 8 feet of feather, teeth and talon and flattened her to the earth. For a heartbeat, the world hung, growing dark before Liz coughed and sucked in a wheezing grasp. She opened her eyes and wriggled her fingers, both arms pinned under her, her left an angry throb from where the Raken's talons had sliced into her flesh. Grating damn. The Raken's face loomed close, feathers bristled, eerie eyes inches from her face. It was huffing hard. Of course, its head. Without injury, it's a wonder it can see straight. Unbind. What? Liz glanced at the circle. No! Besides, she didn't know how, not with Hayne's invented runes. Angry teeth flashed in the corner of her vision. Its talons found her neck and began to squeeze. Let go, it spat. I can't. 5 pricks of pain dug into her skin. A dribble of warmth ran under her chin. Her scar twinged, its puckered length burning down her chest. Helpless, it berated. You swore this would never happen again. Liz clenched her jaw. Never again. She worked her fingers under her, one fist coiling around the knife, the other closing tight on something cold and tingling. The chain. By Sep, she still held it. With a screech, the Raken shifted on her back. Unbind! It bellowed. Now. Liz pressed her knuckles into the earth and heaved. Her arms shook, muscles burning under the weight of the Raken, and pain stabbed down her wounded forearm. An inch's space opened under her chest. Her knife end snapped out and stabbed blindly, striking flesh. The Raken howled, clutched its leg, and its weight fell away. Liz launched upwards. "Get," she roared, punching down at the Rakan with the hilt of her knife, aiming for those gnashing teeth. "Off!" The pommel connected with the creature's face, and the crack of its nose, breaking, shuddered through the hilt. The Etheling reeled back. Liz dove across the dirt, grabbed the back of Haynes' jerkin and hauled him up. Gods, he was heavier than he looked. A snarl boomed at her back. The Rakan had recovered. Blood flowed unstorched from its nose, red globules coalescing in its chin and plopping to the earth. Liz dragged Hayne to the edge of the ward. "You better have spelled this damn circle right," she thought at him. If the Rakan could cross the ward's lines, she didn't know what she'd do. "If I survive this, I will never leave camp without my sword again." The Rakan surged forward. Liz dropped Hayne, planted herself between him and the charging Etheling, and brandished her knife. Then she saw it. A flicker of runes in the manacle on the Rakan's wrist. The sigil. Battered and weak, but a sigil nonetheless. If she could tap into its power, trigger it somehow, she could use it to subdue the Rakan. All she needed was enough time to get Hayne over the lines of the ward. She switched her blade to her left hand and grabbed for the glowing runes. Her fingers closed around the shackle, cold and slicked in sweat and blood. Some of it hers, most of it the Rakan's. The Rakan talons swung up to strike. Sept, God's eager, let me do this just once. She reached for the magic inside her and pushed. The sigil pulsed. Before her, the Rakan froze. Liz forgotten as it sucked in a breath. Heat lanced up Liz's arm, down her ribs, deep to the base of her spine, then roared up her back like a striking serpent. She screamed, hands flying to her temples as a spark dug in. Heat unfurled through her skull. The scent of blood crawled up her nose and over her tongue, its metallic taste gagging in her throat. Her eyes stung. Her vision went black. Gods and Jindir. What had she done? The world unhinged.
Hi, this is Naomi Shippen. I love writing in all its many forms, blogs, book reviews, and even novels. Women's fiction, suspense, and domestic noir hold a special fascination for me, and I also love to read stories about young people coming of age and finding their place in the world. Today I would like to review Invisible Boys by Holden Sheppard. Set in Western Australia, Invisible Boys is about an unlikely alliance between three teenage boys who seem to have nothing in common apart from the growing realisation that they prefer boys to girls. And in a town that will accept nothing less than exclusive heterosexuality, this can be a dangerous preference. The story features footy hero Hammer, nerdy overachiever Zeke, and aspiring rock star Charlie. They all have a lot to offer with their unique talents and dreams for the future, but fearing all this will be negated if they reveal their true selves, they hide from the world and become invisible boys. Every day in their homes, their Catholic school, and the small town they live in, the boys must tread a difficult path. Ignorant barbs disguised as humour, ostracism, and outright physical violence are all the dangers they must navigate as they grow into men. And whether they choose to seek the safety of the shadows or publicly make a stand, there is always a price to be paid. In telling the story of these vulnerable young men, Holden Sheppard delivers humour, anguish, and some unexpected and confronting insights into human nature. I listened to the audible recording, often laughing out loud at the brilliant and funny characterisations wonderfully narrated by Nick English. I have learned a lot from reading Invisible Boys about how difficult it is for anyone in our society who doesn't fit the heterosexual mould. But most of all, I learned our community will be poorer until we learn to accept people for who they are and not who we expect them to be. The Invisible Boys are going to stay with me for a long time after hearing their story, and I look forward to reading more from this incisive and captivating author.
Let's meet again when magic happens.
Australian Book Lovers acknowledges First Nations peoples and recognises their continuous connection to country, community and to culture. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and honour the sharing of traditional stories passed down through generations. We're committed to a safe and inclusive welcome for authors and readers of all cultures and backgrounds, including people of LGBTQIA+ communities and their families.